Hey everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, and I've got a legendary lap steel player and just an extremely talented musician in general with Gary Morse. A couple of quick announcements. I want to thank Lou Toomey and Jeff King, our mutual friends, for connecting us. Also, make sure you go to everyonelovesguitar.com/subscribe, and you can subscribe to the audio and video. If you're watching this on YouTube, click that bell and subscribe button down there. Thanks. Let me tell you a little bit about, I'm saying a little bit, he's got a very, very rich and very cool musical history. So let me get into this. And thank you, man. Appreciate you coming on. Born in Lansing, Michigan, where he started playing guitar at 8. At 13, he started playing Bottleneck Slide after a life-altering Johnny Winter concert. Right on there, man. He then acquired a lap steel and transitioned over to pedal steel after he heard Rusty Young from Poco. God, what a great player. At age 17, he landed a gig playing in local Detroit honky-tonks 6 nights a week, as well as playing on demo sessions in local studios. In the mid-'70s, he began recording for the iconic STAX label out of Detroit. And among the artists he recorded with were Johnnie Taylor and Leslie Uggams. I didn't even know she was a musician. I just knew her as a great actress, man.
Yeah, she was a singer.
Yeah, I had no idea. Around the same time, he also began working on sessions for the now legendary producer Don Was, and eventually this led to other recordings, and this is what's interesting, in the R&B genre, including working with Edwin Star, who made that old song War, and Thelma Houston, who had a ton of hits. All of his sessions were on pedal steel guitar, and in many cases, they involved playing harmonics and ethereal-sounding parts used as texture and color in the background, especially when mixed with lush reverb and delays. And I had no clue any of that stuff was going on, man. Amazing. Some of the best era of R&B music, as you know. In 75, Gary headed out for LA, and shortly after arriving, he landed a steady club gig at George's Roundup in Long Beach, playing with local legend and Academy of Country Music Guitarist of the Year, Danny Michaels and the Rebel Playboys. This led to him becoming fluent in old school traditional Western swing style playing, and it afforded a rare opportunity to explore the back neck C6 tuning, since the more commonly used E9 tuning was already taking over and continues dominating the pedal steel world today. I have no clue what that means. I mean, I kind of do, but I'm going to let Gary explain it once we get into this. In the late 70s, Gary began playing with local bands at the legendary Palomino Club in North Hollywood, and among the musicians he played with was Highway 101 guitarist Jack Daniels. He eventually recorded and toured with Highway 101 in the late 80s, and that band, if you don't know Highway 101, they had 10 consecutive top 10 country hits. Around the same time, Gary also began playing regularly at local theme parks, including Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm. And it was on the Knott's Berry Farm gig he found himself playing alongside soon-to-be legendary guitarist and producer Pete Anderson, who we had here on the show a while back. This would eventually lead to recording and touring with alt-country superstar Dwight Yoakam through Pete, and Gary and Pete still collaborate on recordings to this day. In the late 70s and mid-80s were primarily spent on recording sessions in LA and Orange County studios. And at the time, he was continuing to play local theme parks, including the Knott's Berry Farm gig with Pete Anderson. By the late 80s, the California country scene was winding down and new wave was coming in. And by that time, quite a few of the players that he had been working with in LA or in California in general had relocated to Nashville, where that session scene was starting to heat up. And that continued obviously through the 90s and mid-2000s. Gary relocated out to Nashville as well, and he was offered a gig with newly signed MCA recording artists McBride and The Ride, who were based out of Nashville as well. So all the signs pointed to relocating to Nashville Music City, and then in 1990 he headed out there, where he spent the next 27 years as a very busy session and touring musician with some of the biggest names in country music. After 9 whirlwind years in Nashville, which included playing on radio hits by Pam Tillis, I've cut this list short, the Bellamy Brothers, Highway 101, and Paul Brandt, Gary received a call from California producer, guess who, Pete Anderson, to record on Dwight's upcoming album, Last Chance for 1,000 Years. That led to playing on 2 more albums by Dwight, and by that time, Gary became a multi-instrumentalist and was also playing dobro, lap steel, banjo, baritone, and acoustic guitar, in addition to pedal steel, all instruments he plays and regularly does tracks for people all over the world today. Following that Last Chance album sessions, he got offered the touring gig as one of Dwight's Babylonian Cowboys. And while they were opening for Brooks and Dunn, Gary connected with Ronnie Dunn, and he began working on Ronnie Dunn solo records, Kix Brooks albums, and playing with Brooks and Dunn in general. In 2003, he got offered the gig with Dierks Bentley, who he played with for a couple of years, and after that, he joined the Brooks and Dunn tour full-time. He still plays on Dierks records. He's also played on major releases by Carrie Underwood, Lone Star, McBride and the Ride, Brooks and Dunn, Dwight Yoakam, Sara Evans, including her #1 hit, Suds in the Bucket, Eric Church, Colt Ford, Mark Chestnut, Steve Azar, Jason Michael Carroll, basically anything going on with a steel by a major player in Nashville, Gary's done it. In 2017, Gary relocated to Gainesville, Florida, just up the road north of me. He's got a studio there, records for clients and producers worldwide. He's still touring and was touring with Brooks and Dunn, and returns to Nashville on a regular basis for sessions. Recent records he's played on include Redone by Ronnie Dunn, Outskirts by Montgomery Gentry, as well as This One's For You and What You See Is What You Get by breakout artist Luke Combs. Gary, thank you so much, man. I'm exhausted. I'm going to let you talk. I'm not saying another thing. Thanks for your time, man. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thanks. I should be a lot wealthier than I am after hearing all that.
It's a common comment that I hear. You're not alone in those feelings. Hey man, how did you started playing at 8? How did that, are you from a musical family or?
Well, it was, my brother was a drummer, 8 years older than me, and he was already really active. And the fascinating thing was, as a drummer, he was really into playing the traditional grip jazz style. He used to practice all day long to the Buddy Rich and
oh wow,
and that kind of stuff. The real traditional jazz stuff. And he took lessons in that. So I used to hear him play, and I started wanting to play with him. So I took up guitar. And initially, it was really acoustic guitar, of course. And back in that time, there were these shows on that were all these folk shows called Hootenanny and Hullabaloo and all these shows that were on back then. And the folk scene was just on fire. Peter, Paul, and Mary. And of course, Dylan was a folk guy to begin with back then, too. So all of that was going on, and I got just enthralled with guitar. So I got my first Stella acoustic guitar when I was a kid. My parents got it for me, and then I just never stopped. I took lessons in that, and then as you mentioned later on, electric guitar, and eventually slide guitar.
I just thought of something. Did you know the Bissonette brothers?
Oh yeah, well, Craig, I do.
Yeah, Greg and Matt, because they're from Michigan, I think, right?
Yeah, originally, yeah, but by the time I met Greg, and that's been years ago, my gosh, was in California by then. So I didn't know him in Michigan. For that matter, Pete Anderson's from Detroit.
That's right. Yeah.
I never worked with Pete there either. And we met in California. So there were a lot of people that were originally Detroiters that I never knew in that scene until I got out to California.
Interesting. So over time, you started playing steel, slide, and then steel after hearing Rusty Young. Were you taking lessons any of this time, or was this all self-taught? Or
the majority self-taught, but not 100%. There was a guy named Freeman Cowger in Detroit who had written the book for Showbud steel guitars. It was funny. They had this method book back then. Without the internet, everything was books or tapes, cassette tapes if you're lucky.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
And so he had this book called the Showbud Method Book, and it had Buddy Emmons on the cover. So I think everyone thought Buddy Emmons was the author of all that, but it was actually a guy named Freeman Cowger, and he ran a store down in Lincoln Park, Michigan, outside of Detroit, and sold steels. And I met him one night when I was playing on a rather rudimentary 8-string Fender Pedal 400 guitar, which was very limited. And he came up and said, "Man, I think you've got potential as a steel player, but your instrument's going to hold you back." And he said, I know you're probably wanting to play what you're hearing on the radio and stuff now. And he said, you won't be able to do it on that guitar. You like the amount of strings and floor pedals and what they call knee levers that you work with your knees too. So he was the reason that I ended up buying a more modern pedal steel. And he did have a guy that taught there, and I took lessons from him initially. And then after that, I just decided to do it the old fashioned way, which was just drop a needle on a record back in the LP days and just learn it the hard way. Just listen to it and then try to replicate that.
Man, you must have had a very good work ethic, because that's not easy when you're playing to instruments that, you're picking up a guitar, you're listening to guitar, you're picking up a steel guitar, which is a guitar, but it's not the same thing as what you're hearing. That's pretty disciplined there, man.
I felt just so in love with the instrument, and just so completely like obsessed with it, I guess you'd say. So anyway, I was so into it that I would spend, a minimum of 6 hours a day practicing, at least 6 hours, sometimes more.
At what age was that?
That age was, at that point I was 16.
Wow.
And I was just like almost obsessed. And so I would just work all day. My mom would come in, and finally, I was still living at home, of course. My mom would come in and say, okay, you can come back to it, but you're stopping now and eating dinner.
Right.
I don't even go in like since lunch nonstop. But it was just time would fly, and I was just obsessed with learning what I was hearing on those records to try and replicate it. And I think maybe all that trial and error of not actually being taught that along the way, you learn so much that's in addition to what you were trying to learn. Along the way, you come up with all this other stuff by accident.
Yeah.
So, I remember a great quote by Eric Johnson, the guitar player.
Sure.
He said, I was on Guitar Player magazine, the heading above his interview and his article said, the best things I play are by accident. And I was, because I get that, because as a studio musician, I've played things. I went to play something that in my head, it was there. I played it and I totally didn't hit what I was going for that was in my head. And they went, that was brilliant. I love that. I go, well, that's not what I was going for. They said, we don't care what you were going for. We love that. You're not touching it. Get away from this. Walk away. So they'd have to beg me, get away, just leave. We're keeping that. So that happens.
Most of your stuff, first take?
No, not. I mean, I do get a lot of first take stuff if I'm lucky, or like in the case of the song like Suds in the Bucket, we got, for Sara Evans, we got that song basically in one take, except the very last bar, they wanted something higher, more sonic.
Right.
So we spent like 5 minutes doing the solo initially, and then probably another 15 going for whatever it was they were hearing in their heads for the final bar. But we knocked out that whole section and the whole song in under an hour, and the whole solo section in probably 20 minutes.
Number one song.
But I'm not often a first take player. I think I get a lot of the ideas on the first take, but I don't think I'm a first take player, because oftentimes that might indicate you're just playing it safe, and I can't say that of everyone, but for me, if I get a first take pass, unless I was just having a moment of unusual brilliance, I think unless I'm just really lucky, I think it means I might be playing too safe.
Yeah.
Back and beat that later. I might use that as the premise for a starting point of a solo or a section on a song or an entire song. But then I go back and try to expound on that, take it further.
As a session player, how much do you have to keep that in your mind for you, as far as like, all right, I need to push as opposed to playing safe? Because it's got to be a tough balance.
There's an encouragement to play safe.
Yeah, right.
The old time is money. There's an encouragement to play safe, and I think it's a kiss of death to all music and musicians in general, because you might make someone happy. Well, you get that especially in the demo scene, in what has often been called the mill, the music mill, where they would crank out sometimes 6 songs in a 3-hour session, and you're expected just to do something that works and is in tune, but you're not looking for that moment that you're going to be remembered throughout history. it's not going to be your, your Derek and the Dominoes Layla moment.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's dangerous territory, because you can get really good at playing certain things really well and safely, and never stepping outside the box. And I think that's a bad place to go, because that's never been what music was about. Music has always been a progressive thing. So somewhere along the line, you got to say, I'm going to take a few chances here. But yeah, so I guess if that answers your question, that's
that says a lot too, that you've been doing this such a long time, and like that's still really important to you. I mean, to me, it just says that, your enthusiasm for making music is no different than it was when you were 16 and your mom said, "Hey man, get to dinner," which I think is really cool.
Well, it's one more thought on that topic of playing it safe. I read something interesting about, it was a guitar player talking about when you sit down to practice guitar. He said most guitar players, and I think he's right, regardless of your instrument, not just guitar, when you sit down and start practicing, all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're playing all the stuff you already know, or you're warming up on that. That's fine to get your dexterity up. But at some point, if you keep playing the same stuff over and over, like practicing, so to speak, the same stuff, you're not moving forward. And I think that's the same as a studio musician. If you have this little kind of bag of tricks that you can always pull out, you want some of those, because otherwise you're not recognizable as a player, I guess. You have signature licks.
Yeah.
But you don't want to get so wrapped up in that you don't ever move forward. And that's the same as rehearsing. I mean, practicing, I try to set out a few things that I will try to learn on steel or whatever instrument I'm working on that are a little beyond what I normally play or different outside the box, to stretch a bit, because otherwise you will sit down and you will play what's familiar. And
over and over again. Yeah.
I think everybody does that.
Yeah. Unless you're deliberate, as you're saying. Yeah.
The path of least resistance.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you're actually deliberately saying, hey, I need to learn more. I need to do more. Yeah, I agree. When you went to Detroit, you started getting session work with STAX, which I can't imagine the value of that experience. How did you first break into that scene? Because you were still a young kid.
Yeah, let's see. The first, as we mentioned, the first things I was doing were demos.
Right.
And at the time, Detroit was a really big music town. It was called the Motor City, but it really was a music city with the STAX and of course Motown. But there was a lot of stuff going on there. And you think back to Bob Seger and Ted Nugent and Mitch Ryder, and it goes on and on. It wasn't just R&B, but there were a lot of studios. There were a lot of demo studios. So I would go in and work in those, and that's where I first learned, about terminology, punch in and punch out, or overdub, or whatever, words that you didn't even know what they meant. And by the time you're through doing the demo scene, you start getting a little more comfortable with that. And then there was a guy I worked with who was a local, he's country, but I'd call him more of a Marty Robbins kind of almost Westerns themed country singer. And I worked with him locally quite a lot in Detroit. And he knew a guy who was an engineer at United Sound Systems in Detroit, which was where Don Davis's studio, the guy who produced a lot of people, because I worked on stuff with him later for Johnnie Taylor and Leslie Uggams, but he also produced Kool and the Gang and Parliament and Funkadelic, and he himself had been a Muscle Shoals guitar player on many sessions.
Oh, wow.
And he was, working under him was unbelievable. So what happened was the engineer that worked for United Sound Systems knew the guy that I was working with, and he went to Don Davis and said, hey, there's this guy who I like his playing. I like what, because he approaches the instrument a little more melodically, and I think it would work with some of this stuff that you've been talking about. And so Don called me himself one day and said, can you come in and try some stuff? And we did. And I started playing some on the Johnnie Taylor. First thing I ever did was a little more country, and it actually worked for that song. It was kind of country. But in later things that I did for Don, he would say, hey, I love that stuff, but play some of those chimes, those harmonic things you do. I'm going to put a lot of reverb on them. I'm going to make it really lush. And And I look at back and I go, I was basically doing what DX7s did later in Juno 60s and stuff, because you didn't have synthesizers like that back then. They were just at the very, infancy of synthesizer world, and mostly the Moogs with all the wires and stuff. So, I kind of was doing what a DX7 did later, which is just creating these ethereal sounds, that even doorbell sounds, as we call them, in the background. They would mix them in and it worked. And other people were doing that later on. Like I think it was, what was it called? Peaches and Herb?
Peaches and Cream, wasn't it?
Peaches, I think maybe, but
Peaches, yeah, I think was it? Yeah,
they were not a big group, and I didn't play on that, but they had steel on there, and I've never actually looked into who that was, and the same kind of approach, and then there were guys like Paul Franklin, who's one of the really legendary steel players of the world. He played in that band called Gallery that did that song, "Oh, It's So Nice to Be."
Yeah.
That's all steel in there by Paul Franklin.
I didn't know.
So the steel was starting to make inroads into a lot of different styles. And that's when I got called in to do that. So that was the connection, though. Was a guy who was actually the engineer for the studio.
I don't know do you have the equipment like in front of you? You got a guitar. Can you play an example of something that you would do?
Yeah, I have a steel in front of me. Like, I
don't know if you need effects for that or anything, or if you have those.
I'm handy. I got a little board here. I put a little.
Awesome. This is a true professional, ladies and gentlemen. Always ready.
I've told people I've been semi-professional for years.
There you go.
If you take harmonics like this, like here's something played non-harmonically. You play it harmonically.
Wow, man, that sounds so sweet.
And then add delay. And it becomes this big, lush landscape.
Yeah. And what a sustain.
And you can do the volume pedal tricks, like stuff where you go like.
Wow, man.
And I know there's a guy in California a lot of people know, and I've known him for years. He's a wonderful player named Greg Lease. He actually played steel on Katie Lang stuff and a lot of different people's records. But one of the coolest things he did was play on the Matchbox 20 stuff. And he did this really cool stuff in the background that was kind of like this, like. That kind of stuff. And people don't even know it's steel.
Wow.
My favorite conversation to have with people when they say, well, I've never really heard of steel. I don't listen to country music. I say, well, have you ever heard Gordon Lightfoot's wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald?
Yeah.
And they go, oh, God, I love that song. I said, that's steel all through that song. And Gordon Lightfoot used steel on tons of stuff. But I said, how about have you ever heard Lay Lady Lay by Bob Dylan?
What a song.
So that's Pete Drake on pedal steel. It's like a. And that's all pedal steel. So, and likewise, Pete Drake played on a lot of Elvis Presley sessions, and so it's interesting. The instrument has often been heard by people, and they don't even know that they're hearing it.
Man, I got to tell you, I got goosebumps when you did that. I would like to just shut up and have you play for the next hour. That was so beautiful, man. That little. It's just always amazes me when you have a real professional do something on their instrument. You don't have to make it, millions of notes, or it's just like the way you touch something and the emotion and the vibe you create. It's just so powerful, man.
I love some of the, I think I was like, at one point, I was like so many people that get into the real technical side of the instrument. And that might be good because you do learn a lot of technique doing that. But somewhere along the line, you hopefully get this sudden moment where something encourages you to play more soulfully.
God, that was beautiful, man.
And I think that happened to me, funny enough, as a result of B.B. King. Because at the time in Los Angeles, there were guys like Alan Holdsworth and all these people that were just technically speaking absolutely
burning it up.
And technique for days. But then I went to see B.B. King live in Las Vegas, back at the Sahara in the really old days. And he did more with like 2 or 3 notes. Those guys did with an album. And it really moved me. I thought, oh my God, other guys would be like, all this stuff. And then he'd sit there and he'd just go, and you go, oh my God, I think I just got goosebumps from that. And there was something that came across in the B.B. King performance that said, I need to do that. I need to settle down. I used to have a friend who used to say a funny saying he had. I worked with this guy in California. He said, I didn't think that guy's tone was that great, but he sure could play a lot of notes.
Right. But you can't even hear the tone sometimes. It's like there's so, it's almost like sometimes, like 1 out of every 150 episodes on this show, I get that guy who doesn't shut up, man. And it's like if I shot a gun at the beginning of it's like a race, and he's like, and I'm miserable, man. I got to be honest with you. It's literally 1 every 150, so not bad. I can handle it easy.
It can wear you out, that's for sure.
It's just what's in it for me is like, and it's like I feel that way sometimes when I listen to music where the people have forgotten about tone, emotion. All that note's great, but like, man, I need to do something with this. I'd like to feel some emotions. I'd like to, take it on a journey. I'm having a shitty day. I'd like to get rid of that, and
I totally feel that. And I like it when people can, bring emotion back in, because a lot of the music's so technical nowadays. And I don't know how much of that is to do with the recording process too, because everything's a double-edged sword, right? I say, like I said to my wife one day, I said, the good news is I've got a cell phone. The bad news is I got a cell phone. It's like, it's a great thing when I want it, and it's a terrible thing when you can't even get a moment away from anything.
Yeah.
And it's the same with technology, I think, with Pro Tools and everything. You, in the right hands, it just allows you to be even more creative. But it also can encourage people to quantize everything and make it perfect when it's not perfect. And my gosh, I was listening to some I played on some surf records, Hawaiian steel, on some surf records in Los Angeles for like the Torquays and some of the famous surf bands of the California era. I went back and recorded with some of those guys, and I was listening, I'm going, my God, that drummer is so far behind the beat on the snare, it's crazy. And yet there was something so vibey about it. And I thought, if you release that now, it would be so spot on the money that it would have zero vibe.
Yeah.
He was, if he was any farther behind, he'd be in a whole nother bar of the song. But
that's funny, man. What do you think of a guy like Gilmour as a player? I mean, he's my favorite guitar player, but I was just curious. Slide.
Yeah, I mean, he's totally, I liked Jerry Garcia too, and a lot of steel players who are purists would go, oh my God, it's like, he's just a hippie steel player. And I go, I bet you more people are familiar with the intro to Teach Your Children Well than they ever were of any of the major Nashville hits.
I didn't know he did that.
That was him on Teach Your Children Well.
Wow.
And so those iconic, intros that he played, and the same, I could take another guy like that, like Toy Caldwell with Marshall Tucker.
Yeah.
Who's an amazing guitar player, but he also played steel. And he did play sometimes, like on Fire on the Mountain, for instance. There's a great song. He played pretty out of tune, but the parts were brilliant.
Yeah.
And like, if you could just, have had that technical side to play slightly more in tune, I think people wouldn't ridicule him. But the parts were brilliant, really good. And when I sat down and learned them one day, I said, man, this is so cool. He's thinking like a guitar player on the instrument, as opposed to thinking like a steel player.
He was a hell of a guitar player too, man.
Oh, he was. He did that thumb pick, all downbeat thumb pick stuff.
Is that how he played? I didn't know that. I just know he was.
It played, almost everything was downbeat, where most people would have been both directions.
That's wild.
He had this fast trigger thumb thing he could do, and it just made this interesting tone. I got to see Marshall Tucker live in concert in the 70s, and I always say that's one of the great things about being older is I got to see all these groups the first time, not the reunion version.
Yeah, right.
In fact, a kind of a random comment, but someone asked me one time, so what was the first concert you ever saw? And I said, oh, I remember it well. I was 10 years old and I went to see the Rolling Stones. They said, that was the first concert you ever saw? I said, yeah, my brother was 8 years older, dragged me to the concert. I was 10 years old, and I got to see at Cobo Arena in Detroit, I got to see the Rolling Stones. And they said, well, that's nothing like raising the bar. Like, what happens after that, you know?
Yeah, right.
And years later, with Brooks and Dunn, we actually opened for the Stones. So I said, isn't this cool?
Did you really?
In life, and we're actually on the same stage that they're going to be on. You know, we opened for them.
Did you get to talk to them at all? Like, did you mention to them, hey, you're the first?
They're kind of, they keep to themselves.
You know, oh, wow. That's too bad.
Yeah. And I don't know what I would have said anyway, but it might have been cool to meet them. But at the same time, you know, sometimes it's nice not to meet people that you really look up to, because you might be sorry you met them.
Yeah. Be careful. What is it? What's the expression? You don't want to necessarily meet your heroes or something like that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It can be a disappointment.
Yeah.
More than one of those. So I think sometimes I've had opportunities to meet people, and I'm older and wiser, and I go, that's okay. I just want to enjoy their music.
Yeah. I dig it, man. Well, I'm thank you for turning me on. I had no idea that was Jerry Garcia. That's one of the greatest slide openings. I mean, that's just...
No, it's a cool pedal steel intro. In fact, it's basically. Well, I got to put on my delay on if I'm going to do that.
Oh, dude, that awesome.
That first legendary.
Yes.
That first that hooked you right there.
And yeah,
there are a lot of people that tried to play that on guitar and said, "How do you do that on guitar?"
Wow, man, thank you. That was really cool. Okay, so okay, so then everything's going well in Detroit, and you moved out to LA. What prompted you to go there? And once you got there, how did you get work?
Well, the LA scene, I think for me, the California destination came out about two different ways. One was I had gone out there when I was a teenager to visit my brother. He was living in Malibu and was in a band at the time that was actually signed to a major label. And they were recording a record, and I went out to visit, got to see them in the studio, got to see the whole California scene, and I thought it was pretty amazing. Went back home, I said, man, I got to go there someday. And then the thing with the Eagles were so huge at that time. They were, and all these bands out of California, you had Ronstadt, you had Emmylou Harris, the Eagles, the Byrds were really, active out there, all these different groups that were, and I'm just scratching the surface, American bands like that. It was the everybody wanted to be in California or from California. So I was intoxicated with that sound. I said, I got to go. And so I literally just, put together what cash I could, packed all my gear in the van, and slept in my van, and headed out west. And I crashed with a friend when I first got out there. And then I started making the rounds around Long Beach, because I was told if you go down to Long Beach, that's where they have real, redneck bars. And I was well versed in playing redneck music. I'd been playing a lot of it in Detroit, early Merle Haggard, George Jones, and goes on and on, that whole list. But I went down there, and sure enough, I met a guy at a club he was the club owner, and he loves steel, and he goes, oh, this band that I've got right now needs the steel. I'll hire you to play with them. So I joined them, and it wasn't even a week into that gig that I had another guy approach me. This guy that I went to work with, Danny Michaels and the Rebel Playboys. He came up and offered me a job, and I said, well, I'm really interested in what you're saying you play, because that's fun music and I want to learn more about it. But at the same time, I feel kind of loyal to this guy who gave me a job.
Yeah, you just get out to California, yeah.
So I don't feel good about that. He said, well, I respect that. He said, here's my card. He said, because you never know, things can change. Well, what I didn't know was Danny was manager of George's Roundup, and he knew the whole inside, which was that they were about to go out of business any day because they owed money to the IRS. And in fact, I got a call from Danny one night. He goes, hey, I'm Danny. You remember meeting me? I go, yeah. He goes, hey, why don't you pull your gear out of there tonight? Because you might want to come over and play on a thing with me tomorrow. And I said, oh, I'm not sure if I can tomorrow. And he goes, okay, but I would just pull your gear out of there tonight if I were you. And I went, okay, that sounds funny, but I'm going to do it. I pulled all my gear out that night because I would sometimes leave an amp or two sitting in there. Took it all home. The next day, they had padlocked the doors on his business because the IRS was owed money. Wow. So I would have had my gear like in there and I couldn't even get to it. So then he called me and said, well, would you be interested in that job? I said, how might it work? Sure. And
so this was at Danny Michaels.
Yeah, Danny Michaels and the Rebel Playboys.
Man, that was really like, I know he was self-serving because he had some interest, you know, he had his own agenda, but that was pretty cool, man. And that he told you to get your stuff out of there. He
was a major influence for me because he was not only the Academy of Country Music's Guitar Player of the Year, he beat out like Roy Clark and a bunch of people win the award. He was phenomenal, kind of a Jimmy Bryant style guitar player, which was that old school style, like you hear about Speedy West, Jimmy Bryant, and Speedy West together. That style, it was a real staccato style of picking, and he had chops for days. This guy's a monster player, and he was much older. I was 21, and he was already in his mid 50s. So, you know, we were 30 years apart at least. But anyway, he was an interesting player, very influential on me. But he had been, I think, a big part of that whole Southern California scene for years. And one of the guys he had with him that was my predecessor was a guy named Gene Fields. And now he's the guy behind GFI pedal steel guitars. But at the time, he helped design the Starcaster guitar for Fender.
Oh, wow.
Leo Fender. And he also helped design the early Fender pedal steels.
Yeah.
And went on to become a guy who worked with Squier Strings for Fender. And just kind of a legend in the business, not only as a player, but as a technical guy. And that whole thing led to a very momentous occasion. Danny Michaels was working along, Leo Fender had just sold off his interest in Fender.
Okay.
And he and George Fullerton, were working together on a new company called Music Man, which everyone knows now, but they were nobody. So he formed Music Man, and they kind of looked a little like Fenders. And Danny helped design the Sabre guitar with him. So he would come in about every 2 weeks, bring a prototype guitar to Danny to try.
Oh my God, how cool is that?
And I would get to meet Leo Fender every time. He would come over and he would go, oh, good to see you again, young feller. You know, as I was at 21, I was a young feller, all right, to him. And he said, good to see you, young feller. And man, I love how these steel guitars are these days. I never would have dreamed they got so technical. They're so cool. And he would just sit there. He and George would come up and talk. And I didn't even realize how momentous that was, that I'm sitting there like having a one-on-one conversation with Leo Fender.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. That came about as a result of working with Danny.
That's really nice, man. So you had some it was a good transition for you, that even early on when you got out there.
Amazing transition, and really fortunate to have happened. I mean, I'm sure I still draw from it to this very day, you know.
You've mentioned your brother several times. I guess you guys were really close, it would seem.
Yeah, he was a drummer. He's retired now and doesn't drum anymore, but he was a very active drummer.
Yeah, that's cool, man.
I played in bands with him actually in Detroit. And then, like I say, he was in California and got signed to an artist deal with a band. And so he was doing that for a while too. So from him, I was able to learn a lot about the business because he kind of, he was the point man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you went out there to visit him. You know, I'm thinking like a parent. I'm like, man, how cool is that? You know, like my kids are very close. I'm really, I could just, you know, as a parent, you know, are you a parent? You have kids?
I have kids.
So you know what that's the thought of, like your kids like sort of being adults or independent together. It's a nice feeling as a parent to see, you know. That's really cool.
Yeah, man. My kids are, my son's a guitar player and dobro player, just learning to play pedal steel now because, like I said, my daughter has a degree in music from Middle Tennessee State University from when we lived in Nashville, and she plays classical violin. So yeah, they're both active in music quite a lot.
That's great, man. That's very cool.
It feels good to know that.
Yeah. I'm sure. And it's a bonding experience, I would imagine, between you. It's like another layer of stuff you get to, and because music's such an emotional thing, it's not like, I mean, going fishing is great, but there's another level that, and I love doing that, but it's another level of sharing with that, I think.
Music is, to me, the great equalizer. It brings all kinds of people together with one common bond. I mean, all of a sudden the color bars are erased, all kinds of things that people may even have prejudices about are suddenly just gone.
Yeah.
It's always kind of amazed me how people I've known that are a little bit racist will turn around and just like worship Chuck Berry or something. I go, how can you have this double standard?
Yeah, that's a weird thing.
But it is the great equalizer in that sense that, you could get together with people. And I know when we'd be cutting in the studio, even everyone would be it was like a country club in there, when we'd all be, because the Nashville sessions are done mostly live where everyone plays at once and then you maybe a couple of parts, but it's like collectively you play live.
Yeah.
Like some of the other ways that people record in this world. And they still do a lot of that. And we'd all be in the room and everyone would be like a country club. We'd all be hanging around, talking, everything. And yet I know that from things I'd heard through the grapevine that some of the people I was with were very politically different minded from myself, but that didn't even matter. That was not even a consideration. We were just one common theme, music. And at that moment, everybody was on the same page across the board.
Yeah, that's great.
That's the beautiful thing about music, I think, that it can do that. It can take you there to where people drop all of these, prejudices or preconceived ideas. It all goes by the wayside because collectively you're creating.
Yeah, man. I was fortunate enough to attend a session for half a day 2 years ago. I think Rob McNally was kind enough. He had some sessions and he said, "Hey man, have you ever been?"
Rob, he's a great creator.
Total pro, man, and really talented. And he said, "Hey, you ever been to a session?" I said, "No." He goes, "You want to come?" I'm like, "Oh man, I'd love to see that." And as an outsider, like as a business person, there is no greater value in the music business than paying competent session musicians to make demos for you, in my opinion. It is unparalleled because I saw you guys literally do make chicken salad out of chicken shit at times. I mean,
that's a good way to put it sometimes.
It's like, I remember I had Jerry McPherson on the show a long time ago and I asked him, I said, "Hey, I said, what's the toughest part of your job?" He goes, "Song triage." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well," right. So he goes, "You get a song, triage for you guys listen. The triage nurse is the nurse in the emergency room that like filters everybody and manages case care and stuff." Well, Jerry when I asked him to explain, he says, "Well, you get a song that's dead on the gurney, has no right to live, and we have to resuscitate it."
Mm-hmm.
And for the money, you guys earn your money 10 times over. Where can you go in and get competent? I mean, the best of the best, Nashville, it's not like, three guys in the Bronx, this is like Nashville, man. And I was just blown away by what you guys created. It was,
I think musicians are pretty good value when you consider, when you're all the years and that went into learning what you do and all the gear you had to buy out of your own pocket and all that stuff, coming up. And certainly, it's on the way up, so to speak, if you're lucky enough to do the studio scene and major tours and all that. If you're one of the ones that's fortunate enough to be, I guess, determined enough and still have the talent as well to do that, you're going to take some real hits along the way. That's for sure.
Yeah.
They really living almost destitute at times. So by the time you get to the point that you can do what you're talking about, your profession in the studio, I think they're getting a pretty good value. in any other field, you'd be making 10 times what you make in music.
Well, that's the thing, because, if you go to a cardiologist who's done 5,000 heart surgeries and go to a cardiologist who's done 1,000 of them, well, that guy who charges you who's had 5,000, he's going to charge you 30 grand for the same operation. The other guy might charge you 8 for.
Mm-hmm.
You guys don't have that benefit.
Yeah, the closest it came to that, and it certainly was true in the heyday of Nashville's recording, when people would sign, tickets for like double scale,
right?
So that you got double pay, and that suddenly you're stepping up the pay scale to a pretty nice amount, and occasionally triple scale.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that about Steve Gadd, the famous drummer.
Sure.
And my cousin was a producer in England. I'm half English, and he used Steve Gadd on recording sessions in London. And I heard a great story about him, that supposedly he was getting double scale and raised it to triple because he was working so much that someone said, "Man, they'll still hire you. Go to triple scale. Get your money's worth." So he did, and he was still working just like crazy amounts. And he had a conversation with someone one day who said, "I'll tell you what. Raise your price to 5 times scale, and your sessions will cut off. Some of them will dwindle, but you'll still be making the same money for less work, because those who do hire you, that they're determined to have you, will pay that much. So you'll work less and make more." He said, "I think you're crazy, but I'm going to try it." He raised it to, supposedly, anyway, this is the rumor, raised it to 5 times scale, and his work doubled. They said, "Oh, if he's worth 5 times scale, he's got to be the best."
Wow. Well, that's how marketing works, though. So a lot of it, something's more. The perception is it's more because. Yeah. Wow.
I haven't had that problem yet, but I have been fortunate to be on the sessions that paid double a lot of times on the major records, and that's appreciated, because you really need it.
Well, you guys, I mean, you guys work really hard to get where you're at, and the only, as an outsider, the only people I can compare you all to are athletes. It's a lifetime of training. Yeah. For little bursts of performance,
Yeah, and just like athletes, there's going to be a limited window. Certainly in the world of not necessarily so much recording, maybe there, but especially in touring, where people are so obsessed with having younger bands. You might have an artist who's 70 years old, but he wants a 25-year-old band on stage.
Is that still, because everybody I'm talking to, really,
especially in country music.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say it's exclusive, but I think they're crazy because they're not going to get people with as much experience, and those people are going to be looking for that next big thing to move on to anyway. So they're probably not going to get long-term loyalty. But on top of that, if they're that young, it's just going to make the other one the star look that much older. So I mean,
that's really weird. Unless there's a control thing there, I don't know. But I've spoken to some guys that told me. I had a guy that I know, and he was telling me one time, he said, I said, "Oh man, how's this gig coming?" He goes, "I got moved off." And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "When I got out there, we had the first practice, everything was cool. Then I get a meeting, management, and they said they need someone that they want to wear leather pants, and they need someone that looks younger." Well, I said, "Man, you didn't age from the time they hired you to the rehearsal. I mean, they knew how old you were. I'm assuming when they hired you, they didn't think you were 25, right?" He goes, "No." So I have heard this on occasion.
And you're basically touching on, my sore spot is there's music, and then there's what they call the business of music.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is great music and what is, financially viable are two different entities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I'm quick to say, I don't mince words about it, because I've been doing this long enough that I'm in my final years of doing it probably professionally. Maybe another 10 years if I'm lucky, maybe only 5 years. But so I'm not afraid to say and speak out that I know for a fact that most managers and people in the business are people who tried to make it as stars. A majority of them didn't start off in the fishing industry, selling like fly fishing equipment, and decided to switch over. Most of them, they started out and they, like my cousin was a producer in England, I told you.
Mm.
He always wanted to be a drummer, and he learned how to play drums, but he said, I never could really connect as a drummer, but I found out I had a real talent as an engineer and a producer. Right. And he went on to work with 10cc, Paul McCartney, all kinds of legends. But I even asked him one time, so do you still play drums? And he goes, I haven't touched them in 30 years. But that's why he wanted to hire Steve Gadd, because it was a dream to have Steve Gadd so vicariously.
Oh, that's so funny. Right.
But the industry's full of people. You ask anybody, I've talked to some really major power managers, and I've said, so I mean, you play, don't you? And they go, well, I played in college and stuff, but I found out I was better at managing, and they are great at managing. I'd be a horrible manager, but that's their forte. But maybe they can't ever quite get over that thing that they think they know, the creative side, which really what they know is the business side, and there's somebody else who they have to trust to know the creative side. And the two work really well together when they are respective, or respect, I should say, each other's domain.
Yeah.
They'll make moves business-wise that I would never know how to make, but I guarantee you they could sit down and tell me the right thing to play for a record or whatever.
Yeah.
So everyone has their forte, and they do too. But once in a while, those cross over where, some managers will start meddling into your creative side, and I guarantee you most of them are not qualified.
Yeah.
They're not qualified. Sure. And it ruins a lot of stuff. It takes a strong artist to stand up to a manager.
Which makes no sense to me, because which way is the cash flowing? I never get that. People tell me that, and I don't understand that.
I've known a few of those artists who were so determined about what they knew they wanted that they were willing to go to the mat.
But it's their own manager. They're paying that manager. This is what I don't get. You're paying but I guess in theory, if you're paying them to manage, you got to let them manage. I guess. I don't know.
Well, there's that. And there's also the fact that, everybody wants those people as managers because they're powered. They're the inside line.
Okay,
so they don't want to rock the boat too much in case they decide to cut you loose. So I get it.
I get it.
The whole music business, you talk about the business of music, not playing. I mean, if you just want to sit in your room and practice and become, an accomplished classical player, but never try to make your living at it, go for it. You'll never have to deal with that. But the business of music it's a tap dance. It's a balancing act. It's always balancing between the understanding that there is a business side to it, and the creative side, and you try to do both, and it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And I think not being able to accomplish that balancing act means you will fail. You will have to be good. You will have to be good at it, even if you don't want to be good at it. It doesn't matter if you want to do it. If you make your decision to do this professionally, there's compromise.
Yeah, and every successful guy I've talked to, like yourself, that's been a successful first call studio player, is extremely cognizant of this. And some of them have personalities where they can just, it's easier. Others of them are more rebels and they have to bite their tongue. And so,
Well, some people laugh at me because although I'm known more as a country player, I've played a lot of blues and rock in my life, but I'm definitely known more in the country field. And one of my favorite quotes comes from Rush, rock band Rush, Neil Peart, who had that Spirit of the Radio song, which ironically was their only real radio hit ever. Everything else was underground FM, but they actually had a mainstream radio hit off Spirit of the Radio. But he has a line in there. He says, all this machinery making modern music could still be open-hearted. It's really just a question of your honesty. Yes, your honesty. One likes to believe in the freedom of music, but glittering prizes and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity.
Yeah.
I said, whoa! He just said the whole music business in like a few sentences, verses of a song. It's true. It will be a compromise. But if you love it that much that you would rather do it for a living, you'll bite that bullet.
Yeah, which most people do successfully. They figure it out how to do it. Well, thank you, man. That was interesting. All right, now here's where I would like you to talk about. You said earlier, talk about what you meant when you said that playing Western swing afforded you a rare opportunity to explore the back neck C6 tuning, since the more commonly used E9 tuning was already taking over and continues to dominate the pedal steel.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of guys these days play a single neck. In fact, when I'm out on tour with Brooks and Dunn, which I actually do still tour with Brooks and Dunn, if we're ever lucky enough to tour again after all this, you know, the health crisis that's currently going on worldwide, but I assume we will.
I hope so, man.
Someday. But I still tour with them. I only use the single neck with them, the E9 tuning, because everything they've pretty much recorded uses that tuning. And a lot of guys in the business who play both tunings will call that neck of the steel, the E9 neck, the money neck, because it is the neck that you're probably going to play more often than not. You know, is that tuning? It's called an E9 chromatic tuning, and it's a little bit funny to call it chromatic because there is only one chromatic half step in the whole tuning, but they call it chromatic. The other tuning is called C6, which is really a derivative of the old style tunings that were present in Hawaiian music and then later Western swing. And a lot of people play jazz on that tuning. You can play some great rock stuff on it, but especially known for Hawaiian and kind of Western swing, as some guys call it, farm jazz. So,
that's funny, man.
It was a rare opportunity to play it, and with Danny Michaels and the Rebel Playboys, and we even wore the matching outfits with the wagon wheels on them. And
dude, you sent me one photo. Holy shit, you look like really sharp. Yeah, there's like very.
We're all wearing the old like nudie suit looking things with the matching outfits. You know, of course, later the Byrds did it and stuff, and it was real hippie cool, but. We were just straight up like yahoos, you know, wearing these old wagon wheel sequin outfits and stuff, and that's what they did. You know, it was that whole Western Bob Wills influenced, and Spade Cooley, and even guys like Hank Thompson, that stuff. But well, I mean, to give you an example, the E9 tuning sounds out like this. Here's an E9 tuning played. If you play it single notes, and then you realize that this could never be a tuning that you could play open like a cross, you would just be dissonant. So the strings go like this. Sorry, they get louder.
Oh, that last one, the next to last one, yeah.
So you get this chromatic here.
Yeah.
Your chromatic. So that tuning strummed straight across isn't necessarily that usable. The C6 tuning, on the other hand, goes like this. Little out to him, but so this tuning affords you a lot more. Well, like to show you Hawaiian, I learned to play Hawaiian music in the early days.
Yeah, man. You know what?
That's the straight up Hawaiian style. But on that same tuning, you could play Western swing like. So that's the kind of stuff that when I first went to work with Danny Michaels, I couldn't even play a note of that. He was patient while I learned the style. He was a very patient man. Said, if you'll learn it, I'll put up with you learning it. But
that's great.
I was telling you about, they call the E9 tuning. A lot of people call it the money neck.
Money neck, yeah.
The other neck was the one that some people didn't want you to play because it wasn't the so-called money neck.
Yeah.
I used to work with a guy, and I remember one night I thought I was going to fall off my stool. I was playing. I jumped on that neck and started playing. He goes, "Oh, here's Gary Morse on that 2-week notice neck."
So wait a minute. Is that tune actually C-E-G-A? Is that what the strings are?
Well, I'm set to the really traditional version of that because some people have a more modern version of it with a D on top. But I've got the G-E-C-A.
Okay.
And then same. Then you got an F and a C on the bottom.
Okay.
Tuning. Now the old 8-stringers didn't even have that F on the bottom or the C. That would be it. So you can play. like a major chord and then play a relative 6 minor. But the cool thing about having this F on the bottom, for instance, on the 9th string, you can play these.
Oh, man.
And then you get on the real low one, you get this, take it down to an A. So. And it's fun to get on there. I used to play a lot of surf style stuff on that, just mess with people. You get in there and start.
Oh, man. That was, what's really funny is that because we're going through Zoom, the mic on all this, when you played the Hawaiian stuff, do you remember like watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon and they'd have Hawaii?
Yeah, it's totally that thing.
Because of the acoustics, because it wasn't properly mic'd, it reminded me of that. It's like, holy shit, it's like listening to the speaker out of the little the 3.5-inch speaker out of your TV.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. That's great.
It's that actually brings up a thought that, again, people don't even realize that was a steal for a lot of people. And you tell them that. Another example of where people didn't even know they were hearing steel. In fact, I was one of them. Was that Noel Boggs, who was a really famous old-time player, played on a lot of big country records, but he also played on the original War of the Worlds soundtrack.
Was it like Orson Welles?
Was it H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds? Yeah, and I think it was the writer. I think. But
yeah.
But yeah, the original soundtrack. A lot of that stuff, like where the weird space creature would come in, that was done with a steel guitar through an Echoplex delay, tape delay, with it set up to full modulation where it would feed back, and you would get these crazy, sounds that didn't even sound like a musical. And he was doing the sound effects for War of the Worlds, and I didn't know that for years.
That's amazing, man.
So the instrument has a lot of potential for, and that's one of my big things that I was figuring we'd touch on some point in this today, but was just how much I love to see the instrument go outside of its Hawaiian and country roots, to go out into rock and roll. As I said, Matchbox 20 had some, but then you look at Gilmour doing mostly non-pedal steel, but still steel guitar.
Yeah.
And Pink Floyd and Steve Howe, and yes. And
yeah.
Of course, in country rock bands, people like Rusty Young and Sneaky Pete, there's a lot of them that, we talk about Garcia. But then you get bands like that band Red Rider that did that song called
Lunatic Fringe, yeah.
All done on a double neck Fender pedal steel through high watt amps. I actually got to see him play live, Canadian band.
Tom Cochran?
Yeah, and the steel player, I'm so embarrassed I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, he played, I saw him live, and sure enough, he sat down for a minute, he put the guitar kind of behind him, sat down and played all those legendary slide parts that are on Lunatic Fringe that still gets played to this day on radio.
Great song.
And all those slide parts are done on pedal steel.
That's amazing. I did not know that, man.
And of course, I'll give you one more quick example. Would be like Sheryl Crow, that all I want to do is have some fun. That's steel.
That's right. Those riffs in that right behind that. Yeah. Who's playing that?
I think he's her ex-husband, if I remember right. That was her producer too.
Okay.
He played the steel on there, and he's the first one to say I'm not like a Nashville steel player that plays country sessions or stuff, but what he played was so cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
He did it real kind of dry with no effects or anything, and I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine that song without that.
Yeah.
There's another example where people go, wow, I never knew that was steel.
I had no clue. I know the lines, and now that I think it through, yeah, it's a steel guitar, but I didn't.
I tell some people, I wonder, is that our fault as steel players for not, I mean, I know I've done my fair share to make people aware of that, but I think so many people haven't really gone out of their way to make people aware of that, to educate people that the steel is, in fact, a really versatile instrument, and they've already heard it in versatile ways. I think there's a real disconnect there where, everyone knows what a guitar is, regular guitar, or they know a horn when they hear it, but nobody's really educated the general public to the fact that the steel has been used in a lot of what would be considered unconventional ways.
Yeah, I would think that that's because, like, I had forgot who was in town here. Somebody I had on the show was in town here. We were hanging out, and the keyboard player was just like destroying it. And I think after the show we hung out or something. I said, "Man," I said, you really tore it up." He goes, "Yeah, nobody sees me. Nobody knows who I have." He goes, "I've got more work than anybody." And I think it's the same thing with the steel. It's just not a glamorous, for lack of a better,
And you're stationary, which is
but,
why I was saying you're stationary, you're sitting, like much like a keyboard player, you're not moving around the stage.
right.
Very few of them do. And so I guess there's that too. That's one of the reasons I was saying with Brooks and Dunn, I actually wear my lap steel like a guitar, and I use a wireless. I can go anywhere on stage, but I haven't done that just with them. I've been doing that all the way since the 80s. Every group I toured with, I played lap steel live as almost like a guitar.
Yeah, that's cool.
Because then you're moving around the stage,
You're an exception. Most guys aren't going to do that. You might be the only guy that does, as a matter of fact.
There's probably I'm sure there's a few that have, but not many. You're right.
Yeah.
It's the exception to the rule.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's just lack of, and I hate to use that word glamour, but that you know what I'm saying. It's lack of. It's not a glamorous spot. And even when you have your steel guitar and it's not played like you can't, it's a different instrument.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a different instrument.
Not so much posturing going on. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
No, there's not. It's not possible to play that instrument properly and do that stuff. Gary, tell me the top 3 touring experiences that you've had.
Man, it would be hard to say because I've had a lot of good ones. But I can say that, what comes to mind right off the bat is, the Dwight Yoakam experience was really fantastic because I was working with Pete Anderson live. Everybody on that stage had played on the records. Now that is so unusual in the business, and we were all the players on. If you heard it on the recording, on the radio, or on a record you bought, that was us you heard. And so live, we sounded just like the record.
With good reason.
That's a beautiful thing. And the way he recorded, so fascinating. We would go in and, again, very un-Nashville like, we would go in and rehearse sometimes as much as 2 weeks the stuff that we were going to record. And we would actually he would run like a boombox or a board tape and record all that stuff to reference later. We would rehearse these records so that we had kind of farmed out these songs, because I can tell you in all kinds of groups that they go in and record a record, sounds great, and then they beat it live. They're better live because they've had time to work with it, and it's grown into a new live version that some people will go, I like that better than the studio version. I feel that way about the new Bruce Springsteen Western Stars album. I think that most of the studio stuff is fantastic, but the special he did live from his barn where they played it live, I felt like it went to a whole new level because they had time to live with it for a while.
Yeah.
So that's what we did with Dwight. We actually did that. So that made touring very fun because we're playing our own parts, of course, and with just that whole history of having recorded it together, but also worked it from the ground up together. So that was a great experience. Brooks and Dunn is a fantastic experience that I'm still doing. It's one of the jobs I wanted most my whole life. And
really?
I've been with them for 15 years now.
That's really nice.
Anybody. And it's tremendously thrilling because, for one thing, the songs that they do are such amazing, iconic hits. And they're cool songs. They're really well crafted. And people love that. It's a genre that's not around enough anymore. Some people touch on it, but it's kind of, when you listen to new modern music and listen to their stuff, there's a certain substance to the writing of the songs, the performance of the songs, the recording of the songs, everything. They are very iconic. And I'm telling you, every young singer that I've met finds out I worked with Brooks and Dunn. They go, oh my God, Brooks and Dunn, my heroes, and Ronnie Dunn, my hero, my vocal hero. And it's true. They're really legendary, you know, and it's, when you go on stage with them, that is just a powerhouse of a show, of one amazing song after the other, played really well. Like, we have a good band with a lot of great players. No slackers on stage.
No, you have a great. I think I've had almost a whole band on my show.
It's a tremendous thrill, and of course I get to work with Jeff King on that these days, you know, and that's a thrill too. We've worked in the studio together as well, but it's hard to pick out three. I mean, I could pick out every one I've worked with. Dierks Bentley was a fantastic experience for me. He was coming on like so strong. I mean, he was just like an instant, seemed like overnight superstar. Yeah. And we had a lot of fun both on stage and off. So that was touring. That was, we partied pretty hard, let's just say. And I was the old guy compared to them.
Yeah, man.
I was the oldest guy in the band for sure. And I kept up with them. I did. They always just laughed. They go,
of course you did, man.
You're doing pretty good for an old guy. But we partied hard. I mean, we lived up to that legend. You know, everyone thinks that everyone gets out there and rocks it hard. Well, we did. Good. And it was fun. Every day was just a riot. The whole day was a party. And then we went on stage and it was even more of a party. So
that's great, man.
It was really one of those experiences that I always remember. So, but there were others. You know, McBride and the Ride was a real powerhouse thing. It was like almost like a rock band playing, you know, with basically drums. You had drums, bass, guitar, and steel, and we were cranking out a lot of sound for only 4 pieces. No keyboards or anything on that. And so I would kind of fill the role at times of the keyboard player with
wow.
Like kind of a lot of sounds that would almost be mistaken for keyboards too.
Which must have been fun for you, I would imagine.
Blast.
Yeah, now that I know you a little bit. Yeah.
You know, it's like we talked about Rush earlier. I mentioned the rock band. They're trio, so you know they could play a lot of stuff. The more players you add, the simpler, more simplified you have to be.
Yes.
Or it becomes anarchy. So you get could you imagine like an orchestra with everybody just doing their own thing?
No.
So, but you get a smaller band, like 3 or 4 pieces, there's room to ad lib or be a little more adventurous because it's not going to get in so much in the way of others. So that was an exciting experience too. So it'd be impossible to list 3, but those are certainly some of them.
How about sessions, man? Give me your knee-jerk reaction at top 3 sessions.
Well, Dwight's stuff again was a blast because I was already a Nashville player at that point. I already played on some, you know, thankfully some really big hits. And so going back out to LA and working with Dwight was the complete anti-Nashville experience, which is not necessarily saying it's better or worse, but it was just 180 the other direction. Nashville's very, for the most part, very serious. You start your union session right at 10 in the morning.
Right.
Till 1, and then you break for an hour, and then you come back if you're doing another one, 2 to 5, then 6 to 9. Very regimented, and with some exceptions, some might be more creative than others, but some want to keep it moving along pretty well. The pace is kept up, really fast pace. With Dwight, it was completely the opposite. We would show up there, and it was so California laid back, and you would think, man, is this session ever going to actually start? But when it did start, it would be so creative. And so nobody was like afraid to take liberties and even take a long time just to get something really cool that would be later remarkable. And
there was no pressure either then. Like for time, like, hey guys, time is money. There was none of that.
Oh, no pressure at all. They were just saying whatever this takes. And it reminds me of talking to people who were involved in some of the Eagles sessions where they said, like the Long Run album, where they said they would show up with a bare bones song and finish writing the song in the studio and then record it immediately. And of course, no one can wrong the Eagles. They haven't ever done anything wrong. I mean, everything they've ever done is brilliant. And I think there's something to be said for that, getting it right in that moment of, you know, the creative juices flowing.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with the Yoakam session. So that was a tremendous thrill. That was one of the thrills of my life recording. But there've been plenty of them. I mean, playing on recently I've been playing on Luke Combs albums, and those have we had seven number 1 hits right in a row that I was I think we're on the 8th one right now, and I've been fortunate enough to be on all of those.
That's
and
awesome.
That has been a really great experience because he, for one thing, almost everything he sings in the scratch vocal ends up being the keeper vocal. He's that good.
Wow.
I mean, he's one of those old school guys. They don't even need Pro Tools to get his vocal right if they could just use it. And I remember working years ago with a gentleman who passed away recently, Joe Diffie. Same thing. Joe, oftentimes he'd say, Joe, I think your scratch vocals, that's it. Why would you want to re-record it? And a lot of his stuff that made it on the radio were his so-called scratch vocals. And I'd say with Luke Combs, probably 80, 90% of what he sings on their scratch vocal makes it to the final recording because he's that good.
That's
so
great,
working
man.
in that scenario with great players, but also a really amazing singer who also happens to have a real affinity for kind of 90s country and stuff. He really likes that. All of that makes for a hell of a lot of fun. So that certainly is cool. And then I'd have to say going way back in time, because it's hard to pick out my favorite sessions, but going back to those first sessions I did for STAX label and even Motown at Don Davis's studio, just working in that professional world. I'd never been in a studio like that in my life, where I walked in. All the demo studios I was in were real kind of, they were small, amateur kind of operations because that's what you get for your money. I walked in there and it was a massive recording studio, like what you'd always seen in the movies or in the pictures, when the Beatles recorded or something. Here was this mega studio with a massive control room with huge playback speakers, and just the sounds they transcended anything I'd ever done in my life. Can't say my life was that long at that point, but I mean my recording time, and transcended everything I had done up to that point. And when I listened to that, and I always say that the R&B world, especially when I worked with John Davis, they were light years ahead of what a lot of the white folks were doing. Like, to me, a lot of the rock and roll records and stuff, even Seeger and stuff, they were very compressed and not very wide open. And that I went into the control room and heard the playbacks on this R&B stuff, and it was so wide open and so just huge and transparent that it really struck me. I thought, man, this stuff sounds better than anything I've played.
Yeah.
So I think that was a real educational thing, and I got to see. I actually Lou Casella was the name of the engineer, and he would even let me hang out after a session if I wanted and watch him work. And I was fascinated with the technical side. He was one of those guys that would do with tape what they do with Pro Tools now.
Wow.
He would actually take 2-inch tape, put it up on the block, and just go zip, zip with a razor blade, piece it together, and you'd never know it. Like seamless edits that we now do electronically, but he would do it with raw tape. And in fact, one time I went in there, they were working on I'm trying to remember who the artist was. I think it was Parliament they were recording an album on. And I went in, they had all these pieces of 2-inch tape hanging everywhere you could see it. It looked like stalactites of a cavern hanging down.
Yeah.
And I said, what is all this stuff? He goes, these are different pieces of songs I'm going to edit in later. That's like the sax solo section that worked really well. So we're going to edit that in later. And they'd have it with grease pencil, like on the back, it would say sax solo.
Okay.
Whatever. And they would go in and literally cut open a tape, put it in, tape it together. And that's how they were flying in parts. Now we do it with a push of a button and a mouse.
Yeah.
That's how they were doing it. And for me, how could you ever put a price tag on the value of seeing that in progress and understanding that that's where everything we do today came from. That's where it started.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, man. I was really overjoyed. Again, my two boys today randomly start sending me music, and he sends me, my younger son, first they start sending me some Nina Simone stuff, and then my older one, we used to listen to that, and then Donny Hathaway, and Baby Huey, The Undisputed Truth. And I said, guys, this is the best 70s R&B is, you're not going to hear anything R&B wise, you're not going to hear anything finer than that, man. It was just an impeccable genre for great quality R&B, everything about it, man.
I agree. And although I already listed 3 of my favorites, I'd have to say it was also working on Thelma Houston's album, which was the executive producer was Jimmy Webb. which is really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Executive producer, but the actual producer who did the nuts and bolts production was Bill Myers, who did a lot of the arrangements and everything for the Earth, Wind, and Fire sessions. So and then Carlos Rios was on classical guitar on that. So I found myself working with people that a guy who played what I play, steel guitar, would rarely find themselves in this company. And that was fantastic. Just what a great experience. And to work with a guy who had done these Earth, Wind, and Fire arrangements. I mean, my God, you're going to learn if you just sit back and watch what they're doing.
That's awesome. I had a question about that next. It's a really good segue. I found it really interesting how you started off listening to classic rock and blues at home. Then you went to playing R&B sessions in Detroit, and then you eventually wound up playing Western swing and country in California, and that served you pretty well and started your session career pretty much. A couple of questions on that. When you first got turned on to Western swing, I know you said, you had to learn this stuff. Were you even a country fan?
By that time I was, when I started getting into Western swing.
Okay.
But in the early days, I really only liked the country rock acts. I mean, I wore out all those albums, like the Byrds, Sweetheart, the Rodeo album, and Flying Burrito Brothers, and Poco, and the list goes on and on, of what I call the hippie country acts. And that's what really thrilled me. I really actually got into country as a result of wanting to play steel full time. I got a job, like I said, 6 nights a week in Detroit playing country. And it was stone hard country music. I mean, just, straight up, nothing, no hippie country. And I didn't necessarily like all of it initially, but I loved the steel. I mean, I remember songs like George Jones, just being thrilled by the steel parts on these, and learning Pete Drake's steel parts. And so that was more of a vehicle, I guess you would say, for me to play my instrument on.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
earn some money and start doing this professionally. But along the way, somewhere along the way, I started really loving that old country music too. I started really, really taking to it, and I still love that stuff. I think back, I was playing my wife the other day some stuff. Played her the first Johnny Rodriguez single that ever came out, "Pass Me By If You're Only Passing Through." It was I believe that was his very first one. It was the first one I ever heard, and it was Pete Drake on steel guitar. And the intro of him and the fiddle together was, to me, still legendary intro that people still, are knocked out with. Well, that stuff led to really starting to like straight traditional country music.
Gotcha.
And when I got out west, wanting to pursue more of that modern country music, I still needed to make a living. I mean, LA wasn't a friendly city. Nobody's handing you anything, you better start earning money the day you arrive there, because it's not cheap.
No.
So I remember I thought, well, I'm going to have to at least get settled into the country scene here, and then maybe I can start making some inroads into some of the so-called LA progressive bands. But I better get some sort of base here, and that's why I pursued a traditional country nightclub gig the minute I hit town. But I didn't realize I was going to end up with this, with Danny Michaels and the Rebel Playboys.
Yeah.
Be able to like explore a whole new genre. I mean, at a time when I'd already been playing mostly what was been then considered modern country, George Jones, Merle Haggard and stuff were the new guys at that time.
Sure.
He was doing stuff like Leroy Van Dyke and all the way back to Spade Cooley and Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys and that stuff. And so, 1940s, 50s country, he was really active in, and some of the 60s stuff too, like early Buck Owens recordings and stuff like that. So that was a
great
chance
stuff.
to suddenly just go into something I'd never even played before. And right I know it played a huge role in developing.
You ever hear that? You keep mentioning Poco. Every time you mention, they have my favorite Poco song. It's probably a deep track. It's called Rose of Cimarron. Do you know that track?
Fantastic, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah, I've heard some people do remakes of that a few times just because they love it so much. And Emmylou Harris recorded a version of it.
Did she? It's a beautiful song.
No one has beat their version. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And you got Timothy Schmidt singing in that band. I mean, from the Eagles. What can you say?
Yeah. Who's playing guitar on that? Just the opening.
I'm thinking it's Poco's original guitar player. I'm thinking because it's dobro on that on like Rusty Young's playing dobro on that, and I don't think he played regular guitar, even though he does. And what was his name? Wasn't it Gene? I cannot think of his last name, of the guitar player for Poco, I believe.
I don't know. That was original. Yeah, it's such a great, beautiful opening line, man. It's just, you know. Let me ask you this. What is your viewpoint? Like you just said, that everything you did served you really well. It's like you know, your career, the way it evolved was extremely organic, you know, really natural. Not that you didn't have to work hard, but, you know, things sort of worked out, you know, along the way. And I give you credit. You're open. You seem like a super open guy. Like you were open to these opportunities. Like you didn't say, shit, I don't want to play country music. You said, oh, let me explore this. This might be good stuff for me here. And it turned out that you were right. What is your viewpoint on why things worked out for you? Like, why do you think each successive step in your career worked, and like why you were led down that path? I mean, like, do you chalk that up to luck or serendipity or divine intervention or randomness? Like, what is your personal take on that and why?
Probably all of the above.
Yeah.
You know, really. I think it's a mixed bag. You know, I think part of it's being in the right place at the right time. Part of it's having, I tell everyone, you know, there's being talented, which that's a given. You have to be talented. If you suck, you're not doing it.
Yeah.
So you have to be talented, and that's just a given. That's the start. That means nothing. People go, oh, I know a guy, this guitar player. He's amazing, and he hasn't done anything, but he's so talented. I think, well, great, he's talented. That's a given. If you're not talented, you're already gone.
Yeah.
So you got to be talented, and you've got to be you've got to be proficient at what you do, and that means a lot of practice. But then somewhere along the line, you've also got to be able to get along with people. You know, there has to be that you play well together.
Yeah.
But you also have to feel your enthusiasm, I believe. I think a lot of that has to do with, if they can tell you love what you do, that people like that. They're drawn to that. And so that's a big part of it. And whether you network with people well, you know, you know, on a kind of a side note on that, like if you're a difficult person and you can't bend at all, you know, the situation, I think you're out of there. I think you're completely out of there. So I was a band leader with one artist, major artist, and I had to hire a new player in our band. And I got some recommendations because, you know, that's the other thing about our business is, you were saying, how do you get your breaks? Well, we don't have very often cattle call auditions like they do in Broadway for dancers.
Yeah.
Stuff. Everything's word of mouth. It's like
more than any other industry, perhaps, out there.
Any other industry. It's going to be word of mouth. They're not going to put out an ad in, like, you know, the Tennessee and in Nashville and say, Martina,
right.
You know, George Strait looking for bass player. They're not going to do it. They're going to go to the guys that they trust, and they go, who do you know that's not an asshole?
Yeah. Right.
Plays well. And so
I like how you said that. Who do you know that's not an asshole? It's different from who's a really good guy. Who's not an asshole?
Yeah, that's going to be the first question. And
yeah.
So talking
that was great.
People in the band, I was saying, well, hey, you know, we're going to need a new player, and I said, new bass player. I said, give me some names, like some guys. Who do you recommend? Because the cattle call thing just rarely works. Rarely works, and that's unfortunate because somewhere in that cattle call would be the guy who's really great.
Sure.
But there would also be the other jerks that you had to put up with, and it would just wear you out. So that's why they don't do it. So I said to him, you know, who do you know? And when it came down to a general consensus, I said, okay, out of these three guys that all of you guys have said are great, which one am I going to be able to stand waking up to every morning on the bus? Because I'm going to see this guy more than I see my wife.
Yeah, right.
Every morning I'm going to get up and we're making coffee, and you might be a little hungover from that party the night before, and you're going to have to face this person in the front lounge of that bus, and I don't care how well they play when they get on stage at night. Can you stand being with them? Or are they better than that? are they fun to be with? They make you laugh, you know. And so, and you go, man, he's such a joy to be on the road with her. She is, whatever. There's a lot of females that are great in the business, and that you get to tour with too. And if you have this camaraderie, that's going to be a huge part. I tell people a lot of times I would have, and I did as a band leader, choose sometimes players that were just a little less accomplished than the best player, because I felt like they were a better fit. So the personality thing does play a big role, and you have to be, you know, this business is full of egos. We all have egos, every one of us. I mean, I tell people, if someone says, "Oh, they don't have an ego," I say, "That's bullshit." You get into this. You play live music because you have an ego, because you like getting in front of people and playing.
That's funny, yeah.
It is exciting, but anybody who won't admit it is just lying.
Well, you can have an ego, not necessarily be driven by ego, but yeah, you have to have what you just said is very true. And everybody I've spoken, you know, if the thing that you like that makes you feel great going on stage, that's an ego thing. You know,
it is,
for sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's
nothing wrong.
Thrill. I mean, athletes have it too. If they run
nothing wrong with it at all.
They make a touchdown and suddenly the crowd is on their feet. Of course they love it. Who doesn't love being adored?
Yeah.
You know, so and you know, people cheering for. You get that in live music, and believe it or not, you get that in the studio too. You know, you go into the control room and people. I remember I had a session not too long ago. I cut a lap steel part on, and it's still one of my favorite parts I've ever played on lap steel. And it was melodic, and I don't know, everything just lined up and I hit it right. And I went in to the control room. And they all stood up, and these are some legendary players whose names I won't give, but they are household name legendary players. Stood up and applauded.
Oh man!
I'm like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed, because I mean, how can you get this from these people? But it was one of those moments you go, wow.
Good for you, man.
I felt good about it, but also what a touching moment that I will always remember, that they felt the love of it, you know, and it. So there is ego. I mean, I think if anybody says there's not, I wouldn't trust that. So the ego is part of it, but channeling the ego in a positive way.
Yeah.
Go wild and crazy. You know, I think if you didn't have a little of the ego, what would make you even do it in the first place? You know?
Yeah.
So, but if you can use that ego to perhaps fuel your creativity and your drive, I think that's a positive use of it.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Don't let it get out of hand. So yeah, those are, so, you know, you asked about the many things that I obviously was lucky though. And
yeah.
And I was,
well, you I think luck is one of the things you know, I would agree with you.
You gotta have it, but
yeah.
I think also sometimes it lines up for people that are really wanting it badly enough that they're willing to give it all. And I mean, it is a give all situation. I mean, every musician in the world will talk about their lost loves along the way, that they lost, you know, either the wives or at least special girlfriends along the way, because they were so driven to what they did that it literally took precedent over their mate, you know? And unfortunately it's a sacrifice they made, and it's a sacrifice you made too. So it's just it requires you to almost, like, you know, give your entire heart and soul to the business, or good luck.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think that is pretty well. I think anybody who's made it will say the same thing. I know they will, because I've spoken to a lot of people already, and they all say the same thing. It's a massive commitment to become what I've heard people say. And it's really funny, because the stories I will hear sometimes are almost word for word the same from different people. And it's like, I always tell people, if you want to be a musician, don't do it. But if you have to be a musician, like you can't breathe, and then you should do this. For the reasons you mentioned. You know, are you prepared to walk away from relationships? Are you prepared to have no money for a while?
Yeah, and really have no money for a while.
Yeah,
I mean, because it's feast or famine.
Yeah,
and you know, there is no really. I almost said there's no such thing, but there's rarely an overnight success.
Yeah, rarely in any field. I'm
full of them, but most of them are not overnight successes. It's just that's when they came on your radar, you know.
Bingo.
Then you think it's an overnight success. In fact, they have a long lineage and a long history of doing it. But it's I will say that I've said to people, you know, many times that once, if you're fortunate enough to make it to that point where you're playing on hit records, there's not a day goes by I don't turn on the radio and don't hear myself every day.
And
My
that
wife,
feels
oh, there
great.
you are again. There you go. You're on the radio. Come here, honey. So it's a thrill. And
That's got to feel great.
oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. And still I critique myself as I hear it. Yeah, I wish I'd used a little less delay on that one part. I still critique every time I hear myself on the radio, I critique myself. But you know, it is a thrill, and it's, for me, I can say, you know, there were a lot of hardships coming through this business to get to the point where I was working with major acts and playing on major hit records. That said and done, I honestly believe it was worth every bit of it.
Great.
Because when it does get there, if it does, it is so amazingly fantastic that you go, oh, this is why, you know, this is why I did. I can say the same thing about my marriage. You know, I've got a great marriage. It's not my first marriage, but it's a great marriage. And you go, wow, this is why I went through a lot of bad relationships on the way, so I'd know.
Yeah, right on, man.
But it's true, and it's that way with music. I think, you know, you had to experience all these other things. So when you do get there, and you're lucky enough to get there, it is such a treat. It is such a treat to actually get paid to, you know, fly on private jets,
that's got to be
travel on luxury buses that with your own bunk, walk out on stage in front of the most people I ever played for was 500,000 people one time. I played with Susie Boggess on the Capitol lawn for 4th of July, and there were 500,000 people there. So
holy smokes,
20,000, 100,000, whatever. You know, it's a rush, it's a thrill, and I never have lost sight of what a privilege I think it is.
That's cool, man. And congratulations on all of the above, the marriage and the career.
Yeah.
You moved to Gainesville a few years back. What was the trigger for that? And also, was it an adjustment moving from a place where I know you knew everybody to a place where maybe you didn't?
Well, I think that there were a lot of reasons, but one of them was that my wife has family here. I have in-laws here.
Great.
And she had originally been from here in Gainesville for a long time, and Nashville wasn't turning out to be the best fit for her that we had hoped it was going to be. She and I both had high hopes, but you know, a lot of things that were going on in her field, which is a completely different field, that weren't working for her. And she was also missing her family and stuff, and was offered her old job back in Gainesville, and she didn't think I'd be willing to leave, but you know, I was ready for a change. I'd been in Nashville for 27 years.
Yeah.
It's like I was ready to make the change from LA to Nashville. I'd been there 12 years and felt like I had done kind of everything I could do. And so Nashville was like a new adventure for me, and it was an amazing one. But things have changed in Nashville too. You know, it's a much more youth-driven industry than it was in the old days in Nashville. So that affects some of us that are, you know, no longer in our 20s. And so there was that factor. But there was also that I was just ready for a change. I was ready for a change. And in my experience, she said, "Are you sure?" My wife said, "Are you sure? You know, I don't want you doing something you'll be sorry for, but I'd love to go if you feel, you know, the motivation." I said, you know, some of the best things that have happened in my career have happened after I made a big move like that, because it was time to shake it up, time to move on.
Yeah.
And I felt the same way when I left Detroit, even though I was successful there, to go to LA. Same way, like I said, to go to Nashville. So coming here, it was a crapshoot as to what would happen, but lo and behold, it's been fantastic. I've connected with a lot of people here. Of course, Gainesville's got a rich history, you know, with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers from here, all those guys. Stephen Stills, I guess, still has a place here.
I did not know that. Interesting.
Yes, does. I met his manager the other day. And then, of course, the Leedens and Don Felder. Mm-hmm. And those are just a few examples that come out. And a lot of people say Lynyrd Skynyrd, even though they were, I guess,
like Jacksonville.
They spent a lot of time playing here. So a lot of people try to claim them for their own. But I think going back to the real deep catalog, Bo Diddley.
Mm.
And I didn't even realize Bo Diddley was from Gainesville. So there's a rich musical history here that seems to be just starting to try and revitalize. And I think that's exciting. I always
That
like
is good.
So I feel that felt good. But also, I think it's from a technical standpoint, this was the biggest influence for me being able to move. I do recordings for home all the time, overdubs. I played on some really sizable, not just sizable, #1 hits since I've moved here that I've played on the radio, that I cut my parts right here in this room I'm talking to you in.
That's
now,
awesome.
That didn't happen in the old days, but we're in a different era now where even when I was in Nashville, I think the writing on the wall for me was why I was able to move safely and not have everything just come to a grinding halt, was that even when I was living in Nashville, I would talk to like producers or writers or whatever. They would call and say, hey, I've got a track I want you to put some steel on and throw a dobro part on too while you're at it. I say, okay, when do you want to do it? And they go, well, I'm just going to send you the tracks and go ahead and do it. And I would say, because I enjoy recording in person.
Sure.
Well, if you want, I don't mind coming over to the studio. It's not going to cost you any extra. I'll come over and record with you and we can hammer out the parts. And they go, well, I got a lot going on trying to mix this thing. I'd rather just send you the tracks and you do your part. I trust you. We've worked together for 20 years, do it. So here I was in Nashville, not even recording in Nashville, recording in my home studio. I might as well have been in, Cairo, Egypt if I wanted, or Anchorage, Alaska. It didn't matter. They didn't want me to come over to the studio because they're too busy sometimes working other projects. They said, I'm going to send you the tracks, send me that part. And, 90% of the time, I'm lucky the first ideas I put down are, they say they're happy. So, and that occasional time, if they're not, I say, just send it back, tell me what you're looking for, and I'll recut some sections if you want. But that rarely seems to happen.
That's great.
But that's the thing. I mean, I'm cutting for a lot of the same people I did in Nashville. And I think it's funny because I've had people here in the studio talk to me about it, and I've actually pulled up the track and soloed my part and said, yeah, this is the part that you hear on the radio. And I did it right here at 2 in the morning.
Great.
So creative. So I think that was a big change. I don't know that 10 years ago I could have done it.
No.
But now that I'm here, it's had virtually no impact on my career. Man. And I do still go back to Nashville to tour.
Yeah, what is it, like probably a 7.5 hour drive or something?
About an 8-hour drive.
Yeah, 8-hour drive, yeah.
It's comfortable. I got a good car, so I put on some music and crank it. A lot of times I review parts I'm going to be working on later as I drive. So I make use of the time. It seems to just fly by. And I drive up there. I got my own car to get around. I can leave. In the case of Luke Combs' records, he likes to do them old school where everyone plays together. And I love that. It's fun. So I went up there, was working on those, and producer came to me and said, hey, you're leaving. You said last day is supposed to be tomorrow, and you're leaving, I guess, you probably got a flight on Monday morning, right? Can it be changed? Because we're going to add 3 more days now over at Blackbird on this album because he's written some more songs with a couple of writers. He really wants to record them. I said, well, I drove. I can leave in 2 weeks if you want. And he said, wow, great. Well, put 3 more days on the books. And I thought, well, this is another reason of why I'd be flexible, drive myself up there, whatever. So, but it has worked out well. I still go back there pretty frequently. Of course, not right now with the coronavirus, the COVID-19 thing. Yeah, man. A whole lot of going anywhere, but it'll change.
Yeah.
It does.
I was just gonna ask you a question. I had a brain fart. Senior moment. Sorry, man. It was something you said. Speaking of COVID, what are you looking forward to most after it's over?
Well, providing I stay healthy and don't get it.
Yeah, right.
That's a good start. But hopefully, there's no way, in my opinion, just like 9/11 changed everything. Travel was never the same, and we lost a lot of personal freedoms, and there was a Homeland Security thing, and all of that changed forever, and we'll never go back to pre-9/11 days. It just won't. Likewise, I think there'll be changes now.
Yeah.
And really, I think when I look at 9/11, so much of because I was doing a lot of international traveling and have in my career, in a way, it caused the United States just to catch up with what the rest of the world was already doing.
Yeah, man, for
They
sure.
were already doing these things that we're now doing. The same thing I could say about us and the COVID thing. Now everybody's wearing masks. They're talking about you'll go through an infrared temperature scan when you go through TSA screening. They'll also see if you have a high fever. All this stuff's going on. Well, man, I mean, years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I traveled through Narita Airport in Tokyo.
In Tokyo. Yeah.
They were already doing that then. I walked off the plane. The first thing I did was walk through a thing with a temperature scan, and a quarantine area was over there in case I tested, high temperature or whatever that would set off the alarms. I would have been put in quarantine while they interviewed me and determined if more medical tests were necessary. That was
wow. I didn't know. That's amazing.
Because they'd already dealt with SARS, which is that's what COVID-19 is a form of SARS.
Yeah.
They'd already had the SARS experience over there, so they were already doing what we're about to be doing 4 years ago, and I experienced it then. So we're just catching up with the rest of the world. They've managed to survive and do it, and so we will too. But I'm looking forward to getting back to what I hope is some of the better things that we could still do and not give up hope on those things.
Yeah.
While understanding there's going to be adjustments, but hopefully not losing the essence of the things that bring us joy.
It's going to be weird. I hope to God, and I don't know if you can enforce this even, but the thought of everybody wearing masks is like, me, is depressing, man. Like, how do you, like, I like talking to people, or how does someone fall in love? How do you see that cute girl with, if she's all covered up, or how do you just talk to someone behind you online? And,
I can't imagine as a layman, I can't imagine that we would always be wearing masks forever. I think what'll happen is there will be vaccinations, there will be other things going on. And let's face it, I mean, the HIV thing was huge years ago with so many people passing from it, and now that's managed,
Yeah.
I heard a doctor the other day talking about cancer. I'm unfortunately one of the people who has experienced and survived cancer in his life, which I think had a profound effect on me and my appreciation of life. But I remember this doctor who was saying, you know what? 10 years from now, I believe we will manage cancer just like we manage HIV and everything else. We will have learned so much about it that we won't cure cancer necessarily. We will manage it. And that's what they think about HIV, that some people, maybe they're not cured of it, but they manage it.
Yeah.
And the same thing would happen with people who had malaria. They couldn't cure it, but they could manage it. So I thought that was fascinating to hear them say that this doctor, who's a top cancer specialist in New York, honestly believes that in 10 years, we will just be treating cancer like so many other afflictions where you get maladies where you go, well, you got cancer, so we're going to have to do this, this, and this, and you'll be fine. We'll manage it.
I hope so.
And so I think that's hopefully the blueprint for where we go with all of this, with the viruses and everything else. We're a world, they say the only reason why the bubonic plague didn't wipe out the world was because there was no international travel back then. By the time people's boats would reach our shores, they were all dead.
Yeah.
So no worries about it ever affecting us. If there had been airline travel back then, the bubonic plague would have probably hit and wiped out a good chunk of the U.S.
Yeah, very true, man.
We have to treat things differently these days. We have to, and I think we've been on borrowed time, don't you? I mean, my God, how many times have I been on a flight and some guy's hacking next to me or sneezing all over the place and coughing like they had tuberculosis, and I'm going, I can't believe these people are even allowed on a plane.
Yeah, that is not cool.
There was nothing about it that would stop that. Well, that's going to change.
Yeah, as it should, man. You shouldn't be able to go on it.
That's a positive.
Well, especially you got elderly people on there and babies or something that, you got an elderly person that might have, frail to begin with, that they don't need to get exposed to.
Like they say, a flying petri dish. It's true. I mean, just like they stopped smoking. I mean, I remember the early days when smoking was a lot on flights. They would say, well, up front is the smoking section. No, the entire plane was the smoking section.
Right.
You could be in the last row and you weren't going to get away from the smoke. It still blew back there. So now with no smoking, they've solved that problem.
Sure.
People are welcome
That's
to
true.
smoke all they want in the airport, but when they get to their smoking zone, but not on a plane ever. And so that's the same thing we'll have now. There's people will be stopped if they appear to be sick, and so they should. I mean, they should stop themselves, but if they don't, other people should, because
Yeah.
that's been a problem for a long time, and it's just finally caught up with us.
Yeah.
That'll be the silver lining out of all this, is that we'll maybe establish some guidelines so people aren't making everybody sick on flights all the time.
That's a very healthy, optimistic way to look at it. I agree with you, everything you said, man. I think it's real good.
I don't know what will happen with live music. That's a little scarier. I think at some point they're going to figure it all out to where people can, be in the same room again or whatever. But a lot of that
God, I hope so.
I think it'll have to do with vaccinating and preventive, medicine and everything else that would have to all work together for people to be able to be near each other again. We can't go through life wearing masks. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. But you know what? The mask thing on planes, again, in Japan, they were, 4 years ago, everybody on that flight when I got on it, except me, had a mask on. That was 4 years ago. So I could see that becoming a norm on flights, because you are jammed with each other shoulder to shoulder and breathing each other's germs. So maybe that's here to stay. Maybe that is, but I don't think literally in every scenario in life. I hope not. Sounds boring.
Hey, you mentioned you had cancer. What were some low points in life, and how'd you get through them?
That was certainly one.
Yeah, I got to believe that.
Yeah, that's certainly a low one when you find that one out. And but I was pretty resilient and determined to try and live, and so I really wanted to, and I think that has a lot to be said for having the will to.
Yeah.
Low points were definitely like in my early days in LA, just struggling so hard. Even though I had this gig there, working in a nightclub, the cost of living was super high, and making headway into what your hope is the next level up in your career, so difficult. And I remember coming back to one day having an eviction notice on my door of my apartment, and I barely got the money together to keep my apartment, and so that was super low point for sure. Just feeling like it's never going to happen. And it's funny, that I have to say that a lot of times in life when I've just about been ready to give up was when some of the best stuff happened. And
hang on a second. Let me just process that. Just when you're about to give up. So what do you think that is?
I don't know, but in a very funny, in a very, very funny analogy, a friend of mine told me one time, he is a kind of a hack golfer, but he loves golf. And he said, you know what? He said, I've been trying to quit this game for 30 years already. He said, and every time I say, that's it, I'm throwing my bags away, I go out and have the best game I've had in a year. He goes, I can't now. He goes, now I got to keep playing.
Yeah, that's funny.
And so it was kind of like that for me. I think I'd get to that point where I go, it's not going to happen. Everybody I know is getting great tours, working on records. I'm not getting any of this. It's just not going to happen, out in LA where it's so tough. And just when I finally almost gave up, all of a sudden in comes a great call, and actually a favorite little sideline story that goes with that is that you never know who the people that you're working with right now.
Yeah, man.
The next superstars, and they're just like you. They're at that point they might not be doing anything, but they may be the next big thing in a few years. And I remember Barry Beckett, the producer in Nashville.
Yeah, I've heard stories about him. He with Muscle Shoals. He was like one of the Muscle Shoals guys too, right?
Yeah, just outstanding, and especially known for his B3 playing.
Right.
In his bathroom at his studio, he had all these. Someone had done calligraphy. I don't know if it was a personal family member, maybe his wife. I don't know. Calligraphy, little written down his favorite quotes or sayings, and framed them. And they were in the bathroom. So if you're in there taking a leak, you're reading this on the wall. And one of my favorite things that he had on the wall said, be careful of the toes you step on. They may be connected to the ass you have to kiss tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God. And I remember that was 25 years ago. I saw that. And I said, man, does that say it all? Because I had that actual experience happen where I was working on it for a very new producer in LA, got called in to play on the session. And this poor guy, he was literally sweating like profusely. He was so out of his league. He's a new producer, so under the gun. He's got a union session, and like particularly the horn players were being brutal on him. They were like, anything he said, if he didn't say it in exact terminology, they go, "What are you trying to say? You mean so and so?" And they're making him squirm. And I thought, man, you guys are jerks, So I finally went to him at the end of the session because he was doing some slide work on this one song. And I said, hey, man, why don't you get these guys finished and out of here? And I'll just stay after and do my parts. He goes, oh, I'd love to do that. He goes, but we don't have the budget to go into another session. I said, it's on the house. I'll just do it. So after they finished, he said, do you mind we go get lunch? I said, let's go out. He bought me lunch, came back, and he said, sure you don't mind doing this, not, gratis, because I can't go into, he would have had to pay me double scale. I would have been by default the session leader on it. Okay. I said, no, just put me on the card. This is a freebie on me. And so we did the song, came out well. And, he was happy. In other words, that's why I say it came out well. He was pleased. And his name was Michael Stewart. And I remember a few years later, I got this call. And it was from assistant secretary, whatever, to Michael Stewart, but I didn't realize at the time. Called and the phone rang and I answered and she said, have I reached Gary Morse? I said, yes. And she said, yes, I'm trying to book you on a recording session for Thelma Houston's album. I said, oh, wow, I love Thelma. That's great. When, she ran the dates at me, I said, yeah, that works great. That's killer. So we put the dates on the book. I said, by the way, who's producing? She said, Michael Stewart. I said, Michael Stewart. I said, oh, Michael Stewart. My God, I worked with him years ago on this project. She goes, yes. That's the same Michael Stewart. I said, wow, this is great. I lost touch with him. I don't know what he's doing. It's so good. She goes, oh, yes. He's, in fact, he's the president of 20th Century Fox Records now.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. And I thought to myself when I got called down the session, I laugh. I think to myself, I didn't see any of the other horn players on that session.
Yeah, nor would you.
Yeah, and
yeah, that was
because they were not kind. And I think that was a lesson to me. That thing about be careful the toes you step on, because it turned out that he was a legend after that.
That's amazing. Do you know Mike Durham by any chance?
Oh yeah.
Mike Durham told me that story about 2 years ago, and I have never forgotten that quote because I thought it was so funny, and it's so ironic you bring it up again.
So much.
Yeah.
Had he seen it at Barry's studio by any chance, or he just heard it from someone
else?
No,
he saw it at Barry's studio, and I think his was a little different. He said it was, be careful of the toes you step on the way up because they will be attached to the ass you need to kiss on the way down.
And I probably abbreviated it, but that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Truer words have never been spoken.
What a great story, man. Now, when you ran into him, what's that? You
just never know. The people you're working alongside right now who don't have maybe if you're starting the business and they don't have a pocket vest in, neither do you. My God, 10 years from now, they might be the legend of the world. They might be the one who's producing every hit record that you can imagine, or writing hit records, or they might be an artist or whatever. But everybody starts somewhere. So, that's one thing. I was asked to speak one time to a class at Boca Raton because I went to Florida Atlantic University for
in Boca.
In Boca, yeah. Music theory and harmonic theory. But I did it a little later. So at the time, it was kind of ass backwards. I I was already established as a player in the business. I'd already played on records and everything, but I wanted to go back and get that fundamental aspect that somehow I felt like I'd never actually gotten.
Good for you, man.
Understanding the technical side of music as opposed to the, you know, the emotional side. So I went back to school for that, and it was a very great experience. But at the end of it, the teacher asked if I would talk to the students at the end of this semester, because she goes, you know, we have a unique situation here. One of our students is a guy who's already doing this. So, you know, do you have any words of wisdom? You know, and that was one of the things I told him, was that story, you know, about, you just never know. I said, look at you, this classroom of people. Every one of you is on a level playing field right now, but who knows, 5-10 years from now, maybe a few of you are going to be the shit. You're going to be the deal, and you're going to be running the show because you've become that person. Everybody in here better hope you had a good relationship with them.
Yeah.
You know, and if so, you may just be working with them again. They may be your boss.
When you went to that session with Michael Stewart, was he there?
Oh yes, yeah.
Did you guys get to have a giggle over that?
Oh well, I just said, man, I haven't seen you in a long time and everything. He said, yeah. He goes, it's been a pretty crazy last few years, but then he just said, yeah, I enjoyed doing that session with you. I knew you'd work well on this recording from what we've done before, and that was sort of the gist of it. But I know he was basically saying,
thank you.
In words to the effect, you know, thanks for not being a dick.
Yeah.
Everyone else was a true dick.
I think, man, it just, and the older I get, I see this, if you could just be nice, everything is so much easier. And yourself, your own soul is like so much lighter, you know, and you can't get in trouble by being nice. It's just not possible.
Yeah. I mean, you wonder these days when you see so many people acting nasty, you know, and everywhere you go, but I don't think in the long run they're going to benefit from that. And the people who are, you know, still have a sense of kindness are going to be the ones who in the end are the ones who, you know, continue to be successful and also can live with themselves.
I mean, if you look at social media, it's like, man, it's just come on, man.
It's like every drunk I ever had to listen to in the bar suddenly has a web page or a Facebook page to do it.
Dude, that is a great.
I listened to these dicks when I was having a beer.
Yeah.
Now I got to see their written words as if they're the Wall Street Journal, writer.
Dude, right on. Right.
But, now you got to see them everywhere. But it's, and the other thing I think I told that class that time was, I said, remember something, if you burn a bridge in the music business, you better really want to burn that, because what you're going to find is it keeps recycling. The same people you work with, you might not see them for years, and then suddenly you see them once. Like I walked in on a session one time and I said to the keyboard player, I said, oh my God, I haven't seen you in 4 years. And I said, and he goes, yeah, and watch, now we'll see each other every week for like the next 3 months. And he was right.
That's what happened.
I saw him every week and I just laughed. I said, you were so right, Dennis. You know, that was Dennis Burnside. And great, amazing piano player. But I thought it was so funny because it's true. We kept walking and we'd look at each other and we'd start laughing and people think, what's so funny? We go, So we'd walk in and we were on the session together. But he was right. We hadn't seen each other for 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden we couldn't get away from each other. So it's going to keep going in cycles.
Yeah.
And you'll find yourself probably working with a lot of the same people over and over and over again in different scenarios. So remember that.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's wonderful advice.
Where you left off is where you're going to pick it up the next time around.
Yeah, and if you left off with a smile, you pick it up one way. If you left it off like, you guys were dicks or somebody was an asshole, that's how you're going to pick that up too. And it's never going to be upside for you, man.
It's going to be very hard to overcome that.
Yeah. Especially with whatever instrument you play, guitar, bass, drums, steel, there's 100 guys behind you wanting that job.
1,000, I think.
Yeah.
Who will do it for half as much as you're getting too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's that whole thing in Nashville down on the Broadway scene that was, going so strong. People were willing to come in there and play for free just to try and get their break, and lining up to say, please, would you hire me? You know, letting them kick them in the teeth, and they'd still go back and say, oh, thank you for kicking me in the teeth. I'm so glad to have this opportunity. You know,
Yeah, that's really unfortunate, man. That's really,
there was
because
a lot of that going on.
well, these guys are starting their careers off too, and if from day one you're a doormat, it does not bode well for anything else to come of that. You're going to really need to change your whole mindset and get around.
Although maybe it will prepare you for things to come too. You know,
Yeah, hopefully not.
maybe that's your wake up call.
God, I hope not. Gary, is there anything, anyone you haven't played with yet that you'd like to?
Well, one of them I actually just got to a bunch of shows recently was Lyle Lovett. I always thought it'd be so cool. And then I got called to play with Lyle, so that was really fun. So I had to take that one recently off the list. I don't know if I can think of any right off the top of my head, any particular artist, but it would be to take the steel into other genres more. In other words, get called to play on, you know, rock sessions, more pop sessions, more, you know, I got a taste of that doing the R&B thing, and now I just want more.
Good, man.
So I would love to have that opportunity to use the steel in creative ways while continuing to do it in country, to be able to step out of that and do it in other types of music too. I think that's
awesome.
important to me. So that would be my wish. Not necessarily a specific artist comes to mind, but definitely the genre.
Very cool. I know this is a tough question. Favorite musicians you've enjoyed playing with?
Oh boy, there have been some great ones. Well, certainly, I mean, it's a huge list, but I can say that it's, you have fellow musicians, like working with Brent Mason is always, I find that to be a real treat, because he is a legendary guitar player. He's just like the nicest guy in the world,
Yeah.
and always wanting to work together to come up with stuff, if you know what I mean. I mean, he's very supportive of that. You know, when you're working out parts together, he's I don't know how to say it. He's just an absolute, the consummate pro, and a joy to work with, and just humble guy. You just would not know all that he's done from his demeanor. But
yeah, he's a right man. He's from a little blue collar place in Ohio, and that's the same dude. You know, he just happens to play killer guitar. I had him on the show. He's totally couldn't be any regular human being.
And so knowledgeable and so versatile in so many things. You know, I always find him very inspirational to work with. I'm always fortunate when I get to do that. But there's just so many players. I mean, Pete Anderson, another one. Pete really, when I worked with Pete before he even met Dwight Yoakam, he was already playing. He was already Pete. He didn't change when he took off as Dwight's guitar player producer. I remember times when we'd be playing Knott's Berry Farm. People would come in there and pay the admission fee just to come in and listen to Pete. They didn't even buy the rides or anything. They came in and just came out and watched our gig. I would stand there slack-jawed at Pete Anderson, because just such a stylist and such a knowledgeable guy, drawing from so many genres. And what Pete did is, I mean, he just put the guitar front and center back in, you know, the twang guitar back in country music. When things were getting really kind of like syrupy and poppy, all of a sudden Pete comes in just raw, you know, with playing a telly through a Echoplex, a volume pedal, and a deluxe reverb, and just killing it. Yeah. So playing with him live was a joy. Playing with him in the studio was a joy. So he's another one of the main ones I have to say that about.
He's got a great demeanor with audiences as well. You know, it makes you feel comfortable. It's like I told him, I said, it's like having a doctor with a good bedside manner or something. It just gives you a level. It gives you a level of comfort. Like, okay, I'm in good hands with this guy. He's got this in control, you know, which is great.
And he's so knowledgeable. I learned so much from Pete in the studio. His ability to, sometimes he would actually trust me enough to leave the room while I was recording for a few minutes and just go and hang out in the lounge or something and say, hey, you know what to do it. When you think you got something. It was the most interesting thing I'd ever had with any producer. We had that rapport going back many years that he trusted me. And he said, hey, you know, when you feel like you got something, come get me. So I would record some stuff, and finally I think, you know, I like this. I feel good about this section, what I just did, or this song, or this pass. And I'd say, hey, might have something here. And he goes, all right, let's go hear it. And he'd be sitting there along there listening. And I'd never had a producer do it to the degree that he could dissect parts. And he'd sit there and he'd turn to the engineer. He'd go, play that part again. Play that part. And they'd play it back. He'd go, that. I want tons more of that. Do more and call me when you're ready for me to hear it. And he'd leave the room again. And I'd give him more of that. He'd come in, that's it. That's the stuff. That's the stuff. And it would be these signature things that were, looking back, I go, wow, they're so signature and they're so hooky. And he would hear all the stuff that just kind of went along meandering, and all of a sudden he would hear that hook. He'd go, that's what I want more of. That right there, that line or that style. And that was super, you know, educational to me. Made me start thinking to myself about how do I come up with hooky parts that are catchy, that really work. So there was that. And then he was very knowledgeable, still is, on techniques of recording. He used a lot of recording techniques that were really established more in the R&B field, like in Motown and stuff. And like some of them were secret weapon tactics. Like I remember when we recorded the Population Me album, I was playing banjo and dobro as well as steel on those albums. And we're in there cutting a banjo part, 5-string banjo. And he sits in front of me, this Sony boombox. And I'm like, all right, what's this? You know, are we going to get out old cassettes and start listening to them?
Yeah.
And he had the boombox out there, and the engineer came in and hit record pause, and he had RCA chords coming off the outputs. He was using the internal condenser mics of that boombox to record the banjo.
Wow.
I said, whoa, what? And I said, is this going to sound good? I mean, I was kind of horrified, actually, because I'm thinking he's got U87s and top of the line. He's got $25,000 modded mic sitting here, and we're going to use this boombox. And he goes, these Sonys, at the height of their being manufactured, had reached a level where the internal mics, the stereo condenser mics, were as good as almost anything out there. I said, really? And I was very skeptical, but I trusted Pete, but I was skeptical. I mean, good God. So I thought, okay, we'll humor him. And we started playing it. I went and heard it, and it was just so cool, the sound. And I asked him, where did you learn that? He goes, and I think he quoted that, they used it on some of the Temptations things, some of the Smokey Robinson things. He said this was like a secret weapon in Detroit. They learned that these mics just had their own deal and picked up a really interesting field, you know, as far as circumference and tonality and what they highlighted, so to speak. And I went back just the other day. I happened to be listening to, I wasn't chasing down the song. I was actually listening to a playlist, and that song popped up. And I went, wow, that banjo just pops out of there. And then I thought about that story about how he used the Sony boombox as the microphones.
That's amazing.
That's one example of where Pete was to me, very innovative, but also a guy who brought with him knowledge from a diverse background and applied that knowledge in different areas.
What a great guy to just sit and listen and learn from the guy, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, Dwight and Pete were an amazing pairing because Dwight was, I mean, he was like an old school guy personified, brought back in a modern time with, I still think he's got an amazing voice. I mean, it's so unique. It's not like he's Pavarotti or something as a singer, but he's got such a unique style voice that you would know Yoakam anytime out of a crowd.
Yeah.
So that blending of the two of them, of Pete's knowledge of years and years of history and recording, combined with what Dwight did, I think I look at it as like, you know, Elton John and Bernie Taupin.
Yeah.
You know, the two together created the career that is Elton John. the two of them together, I mean, I don't know what would have happened with Dwight if Pete hadn't met him, but I also don't know if it would have taken off for Pete as big, despite his talent. Dwight was an amazing vehicle in which to
that's the word,
show
yeah,
off what he does and to use what knowledge he has. So I think the two were meant to meet and hook up for however many albums it was meant to be, you know, even though they're not working together now.
Yeah, I think that was good. The word you used, vehicle. I think that's a perfect
For both of them,
yeah, for both of them. Yeah. Give me your top 3 Desert Island discs, just for this moment.
Oh, I was trying to think about that one. I was having a hard time coming up with it. I don't know, man. I drew a blank on that one. I was sitting there thinking about. I suppose one, if I had to have it, I would go back super deep catalog, and grab my original Crosby, Stills, Nash album, just because you can listen to that front to back, and
it's a great record, man. Everything's
Uh,
cool about that record. The cover is
Everything.
You know, everything is cool about it.
Cool about
music's
that
great. Yeah.
So that would have to be one of them, I think. And but gosh, it's so hard to say. You know, there's so many things that I like that it would almost have to be picking out from each genre, like in classical.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I would have to have one classical album, and it would be the Four Symphonies by Brahms. I like Brahms a lot, and especially Symphony Number 3 is probably my favorite. So I've had the pleasure of seeing some amazing symphonies perform that. You know, Symphony Number 3 by Brahms, and all the symphonies, I think 1, 2, 3, and 4 are great. But I love that Symphony Number 3. The way it starts out, it's so dramatic. And I saw the Philharmonic. The first time I ever saw it played live or heard it played live was the LA Philharmonic at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. Then I saw him again doing it at the Hollywood Bowl, which was amazing. Wow. Which, by the way, I just saw today that they canceled their whole summer due to COVID. For the first time in 100 years, they've canceled a season.
You know what's weird? I
hate that.
I got notices
on television today.
That's terrible, man.
Yeah,
I got notices today.
That was such a joy. I remember going. I lived fairly near there, so I could actually walk up there to the Hollywood Bowl, and if I would just go alone, because what I found is if you're alone, a lot of times either they would have the best seats in the house available because they go, well, we got just one ticket left for that section. We can't sell one ticket unless you want it. Or some people would go, they would talk to me and they would say, are you alone? I'd say, yeah. And they'd say, here, have a ticket on us. We had one of our friends got sick. He had the flu or whatever, couldn't make it. And I'd find myself in like third row center.
Wow.
Hollywood Bowl because I went alone. But I remember going up to the Playboy Jazz Festival there and seeing John Williams direct the symphony with the Star Wars series and all the other stuff. All of that was just so amazing. And so, yeah, I would say my number one classical album I'd have to have would be the collection of Brahms symphonies 1 through 4. So there would be one of my Desert Island CDs. But boy, that other one I'd have to fight there because there's so many great ones, you know. I don't know if I could choose that third one. I'm trying. But yeah, maybe something by the Beatles because you can't go wrong there either.
Gary, tell me the best decision you ever made.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to tell me. I really don't know. Probably just to decide to stick it out and do music professionally against all odds when it just seemed like it wasn't going to happen. Just to stay with it. Because, you know, it's the old 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I would think, oh, I'm on my way and this is really happening. And then all of a sudden the huge setback would occur. And but I did learn along the way just to have faith and realize the old saying that when one door closes, a lot of times it means another one's going to open.
Yeah.
After a while, I started seeing that, man, that door closed and I thought it was the end of the world. But then this door opened and it was even better. So, or just different, if not better. So I think the decision to stay with this and do it professionally was still probably the single best decision I made in my life.
You know, it's so good to hear that because you're a guy who's, very successful at what you do. And I think for whatever reason, people don't realize that that is the general path of success in most things, in music for sure. But in most things, it's never, I mean, like, sure, there's a couple of, a small percentage of people, oh, I got this degree, then I went to this law firm, and then I got groomed for this. But by and large, I think success in general is pretty freaking difficult to attain. And not only do you have to work your ass off, but you have to be prepared. You have to get kicked on your ass a couple of times as well.
I
And
agree. And perhaps one of the keys to it too, and I think it's true even in music, is especially if you're going to be a session musician, you got to give them something that they haven't had yet. Because I know so many guys that go in the studio, have a brief flurry of activity, and then their studio career is very short-lived. I think it's because they went in, the first thing in the steel guitar world, for instance, was, well, what would Paul Franklin do right now? Or what would Dan Dugmore do, if newer guys.
right.
In the old days, it would have been, what would Pete Drake or Lloyd Green do?
Right.
Well, they didn't sound like anybody else. They did their deal. And if you go in trying to sound like them, because that's the natural tendency is to cop what they did, it worked for them. It's not going to work for you.
Yeah.
They've already got that. I don't care if you sound every bit as good as Paul Franklin. They're going to call Paul. Why would they call you just to mimic and imitate Paul?
Yeah.
But they want you to give them something they haven't had. So isn't that true in most of business? I mean, if you come up with the newest, coolest type of sandals, or the newest, coolest fragrance and colognes, or whatever it is, it's something that.
What makes you different?
What makes you different? You're giving them something they want because it's new and fresh, and they haven't had it yet. And so it does. I mean, everyone has influences. There's no way you can't, like, my wife will sometimes hear something with Sneaky Pete or Rusty Young or something on it. She'll go, wow, that reminds you of some of the stuff you play. And I go, well, yeah, because there's just no way you can say that you didn't have influences. Even movie directors will say, well, yeah, I was quite influenced by Alfred Hitchcock or whatever,
Yeah, of course. You have to.
Those influences are going to come out in your playing. The Beatles said it was, Chuck Berry and all that stuff, that Carl Perkins. You hear that all over the Beatles, early Beatles stuff. Everyone's going to everyone's going to recycle some of that. But if you're recycling that along with what you do, that kind of becomes, I think, that's the winning combination. Maybe even people who are successful in business who build a better car or a better pair of jeans or a better whatever, a better television than what came down the pike. If you're able to do that, then you've given them something they didn't have, and yet it's still got to be something to relate to, obviously. But I think that's important in this field.
Thank you, man. Tough question. What do you like most about yourself?
It'd be easier to say the things I don't, probably, but
that's a typical musician's answer.
I'll tell you what, I don't know if I could. I mean, I know that I've never compromised my music. I've never compromised, even when I was pressured to do so, without going into details, because people wanted me to work whatever faster and half-ass my job in the studio, because I was on maybe a really kind of 2-bit demo. I won't compromise what I do. Just hire someone else. And I don't care if you don't call me back. That's fine. Just don't call me back. I'm not going to compromise. So I'd like to say that. But other than that, it's just a question of trying to always spend a lifetime trying to improve your bad habits. There's a Gary Allan song that I really loved. He had a song called Learning to Live with Me. And I just think that song is so great. It's all about learning to accept yourself. Like, if you think you're going to be perfect, you're not. And you got to learn to live with yourself too. And try to change those things, but be willing to live with yourself with those things that you wish you didn't do, or you wish you could change, and you'll keep trying to. That song is, I think the line in the chorus is anybody really happy with who they are? You could be the moon and still be wishing you were the stars. And he goes, I think it's something about, but now I finally see that I'm just learning to live with me. So I think that song really hit home and said, well, that's, there might be things you like about yourself, but you'll find plenty you don't. And you try to learn to live with it, I think. I don't know.
No, I think that's well put, man.
I hope that's what it is. I'm trying.
Yeah, and
By the way, as I talk to you, I can't take my eyes off that Les Paul in the background every so often. That's just like, it keeps going, play me.
It's talking to you.
It's a gorgeous guitar.
Thank you, man. Well, I would love to see you play it.
A gorgeous guitar.
Thanks, man. It's just a classic. I bought it like up in, not Lakeland, just north, 40 or 50 miles from here. God, I can't think of the town I got it in.
Tobacco Sunburst.
Tobacco Burst. Yeah, it's a Tobacco Burst. It was a classic.
I got a 1938 lap steel, made in 1938 by Gibson. That's that same tobacco finish that is just amazing.
Yeah. Well, I had, the only thing was it's a classic, and I had these really high output pickups, and I never really played it a lot. It sounds good acoustically, but I hated the pickups. And then I got some EMGs for it. I had them on the show here, and they gave me some EMGs to look at. And man, they're like PAF space, their version of the and it sounds great now. So I love it, man. Thank you.
I've had very few guitars that I could ever keep the original pickups in. They're
a lot of people
say mismatched to what I want, and they try to pick up the most common denominator of, they want that I don't think they're aiming it at people who are perfectionists on tone. They're trying to cater to the guy who's going to sit down and play Stairway to Heaven at Guitar Center.
I think so.
That's the person who they're hoping to sell 1 million of those to.
Yeah.
So that could happen. I'm always changing pickups. I've got one guitar. I've got a gold top Les Paul custom shop.
Oh, wow.
One of 300 that was authorized by Joe Bonamassa based on his 50s gold top. And it's got the original pickups, and they are just stunning. They sound so good. That's one of the only guitars I have in my entire collection that I haven't changed the pickups on.
Well, thank God they got it right, because that thing was probably an arm and a leg to buy. You'd want it, if there's.
I had an endorsement and got it at an artist price, because otherwise I couldn't have done it. It was crazy.
Yeah, thank God the pickups are good in there.
I'm either going to buy this guitar or a house. I've got to make a decision here, but that was one of the only guitars that I ever had that. Honestly, the pickups were just that stunning. They got it right.
Are they like PAFs? Are they like
they're humbuckers, but they're those burst buckers.
Yeah,
they're not the burst buckers they're making now. In fact, he oversaw that they used the original type of wire. Even the wiring harness has the same type of wiring as the old 50s did. He had them redo everything.
Great.
And they only made 300 of them. Mine is number 35 of 300.
That's awesome, man.
It's an incredible guitar. So that guitar, I didn't have to do anything to it. It's just perfect. But most of them, the pickups are so god awful that they just sound terrible.
How often do you pick up regular guitars just to noodle?
All the time. That's why I've got a whole bunch of them here. I've been working on Moot Davis's new album. He's a Americana artist that I played on his. Pete Anderson originally produced his early albums.
Okay.
We're working on that. I actually played some of the guitar parts on these albums. But I think what I offer is I pick up guitar every day to play. I've got them hanging in my living room. I got like a nylon string guitar, a high strung. I've got a regular acoustic guitar in my living room. I'll just randomly pick it off the wall and play it every day. But I also do that with dobro and pedal steel. You got to be plugged in and everything. So it's a little more. You don't just grab it off the wall. It's got to make sure it's plugged in, and there's a lot more going on there. So guitar's accessible, but I pick it up every day. But on the recordings that I do on guitar, I definitely go somewhere that some other players maybe don't go as often, which is that I'm trying to take the guitar, just naturally I have a tendency to want to take it more into almost the pedal steel zone of like tonality and real ethereal stuff. And yet it's stuff that I actually would have a hard time doing on pedal steel, but I wish I could do it on pedal steel almost. I don't know how to describe it, except that it's different. Like even the way I use a vibrato bar will often be to start with that bar already pushed in, hit a chord and let go of it and let it rise up to chords and stuff like that. And the closest I can get to that, it would be like maybe Wicked Game by Chris Isaac or something.
Yeah, right.
It's real ethereal sounding.
Yes.
But I was doing that on one of Moot's things, and they were really happy with it. And it's something that I wish I could do that on pedal steel, but it never seems to sound the same as when you drop all 6 strings with that. And I've got a jazz master back there that's perfect for that. So, but I'll actually take those strings down. You can see they're down about a good tone and a half or 2 tones down.
Wow.
And hit a chord and then let go and let it slide up to that. And maybe even not hear the strike, do the volume pedal after and let it ascend up to that. And oh my God, it's the coolest effect. So I like to do a lot of that kind of stuff. And since not everybody's doing that, I think it's something that they asked me to do, to play on their stuff, because again, if they just needed something chicken picking or whatever, they got a lot of choices already. So
yeah. So your steel playing has been a huge influence on your guitar playing, even the way you hear things. Yeah.
And vice versa. That's an interesting thing you bring up, because I was actually thinking about that when I was looking over, just in my mind, just going over what we might discuss. And one of the things that I was thinking about was how completely different I am as a player on all of my instruments, because all of them influenced each other. Like, in other words, the guitar player I was to begin with versus the guitar player I am now that I know pedal steel and play pedal steel. I'm a completely different guitar player from what I was when I was just a guitar player, because now I bring in aspects of what I've learned on steel into my guitar playing. And I don't mean just in terms of bending, but just in terms of what inversions I might choose melodically. And likewise, I play 5 and 6 string banjo. 6 string being where it's tuned like a guitar. I played a lot of hip hop things on that, but the 5 string banjo, which I've played many, many years, I actually used to play at Disneyland as a banjo player. That's straight up bluegrass, just hardcore 5 string bluegrass banjo. And learning to play all those roll patterns, which are blistering fast, 16th note, sometimes roll patterns and arpeggios, I will incorporate that into guitar and steel. Like I did a thing I'll show you something to illustrate it. Like there's a thing called a Ford reverse roll. That's a banjo roll. And I used it on a recent recording where I'm just sitting there going like, and I was playing this part. And that and background with the delay on, I think I like a chorus effect on too. You get this real, like, you can't even tell that it's a steel in the background, but
it sounds like you too. It sounds like The Edge, man.
Well, it's that kind of thing, So again, I'm incorporating a Ford reverse banjo roll, which is an Earl Scruggs pattern, and
that's amazing.
Incorporating that into the pedal steel, and I've done that quarterly too. Even on the, like I did I cut a bunch of jazz stuff when I lived in LA still, where I played where I went and played a thing like a Ford reverse roll. Sorry. Kind of out of tune right now. I didn't tune that neck very well, but it's where I'm actually playing it quarterly. Sound better losing tune.
When you play guitar, do you use standard tuning, or is it like is it impossible for you to use standard tuning?
I generally do, although I've been experimenting with some other tunings, and of course DADGAD and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people play now, but once in a while I'll mess around with some alternative tunings. But even on a guitar, I mean, I've got for instance, I have a Telly behind me. I'll just grab it, and this Telly, this is again a equipment replaced Telly.
Dude, that's I've never seen a Telly. At least over here, it looks green.
It's an Antigua. Yeah, some people call it avocado.
Yeah.
Because it's the Antigua. And this guitar, again, I hated the pickup, so I put in these things called Twang Kings by DiMarzio.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little skeptical about DiMarzio because they're often associated with, maybe unfairly, but anyway, they're often associated with more like shred guitarists and stuff.
Metal guys, yeah.
But in fact, these Twang Kings, I took a chance on them, and they sound amazing. And so that's the other thing. I used to always play with a flat pick on guitar. But what ended up happening was I would have to make the change live between pedal steel and guitar so fast that I would be sitting there pulling the picks off, getting a flat pick, then I'd have to jump back down, put them back on. Sometimes I'd drop one in the dark, all this stuff. It was a nightmare, and I finally just said, I'm going to have to just start figuring out how to play with the metal picks on while I play guitar. And I didn't realize the guys like Roy Buchanan had done that already and stuff. But, you know, even now, it feels weird to me to play guitar without finger picking, and a lot of times wearing the metal finger picks.
That's wild. Well, hey man, some great guitar players have done that.
If you want like a twangy thing, you know. But likewise, I can do like pedal steel licks, or licks that I do on steel, like where there's I call it a shotgun lick, but like.
Dude, that sounds great.
Picks, and again, you know, I'll incorporate that banjo roll stuff into guitar, like or I use a better pickup than that, but so those are all banjo patterns. So I wouldn't.
Dude, that sounded great.
Play that stuff on guitar if I wasn't a banjo player.
Yeah.
Then again, I've often gone on banjo and started playing guitar parts on a banjo. So it all becomes what's the word I'm looking for? Symbiotic. I mean,
yeah. That sounded great, man.
I love still getting to play guitar, even though I don't do it as much as steel. But
I love that avocado guitar, man.
Blues guitar too, like. It's a good all around telly, I'll tell you, and I like these pickups. So, but yeah, there's no doubt that I'm a better guitar player than I ever was before I learned steel. But sitting out the steel, having a guitar background, allowed me to carry that into steel too, like maybe thinking more like a guitar player. So I think they all are constantly weaving in and out of each other.
Yeah, they've all served you.
And maybe that's because they're all string instruments. Yeah, I mean, what if you were like a sax player who doubled on piano? Well, those are so different.
Yeah.
But that I'm on string instruments all the time. I think that's how they play well together. I think it'd be very different if I was going from that to a woodwind or something, or a brass instrument. But I have to show you one more thing while we're doing visuals. You asked about that finish.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Well, that's an Antigua finish. If I can get this thing down. There we go. I'll show you a very rare guitar. This is actually a vintage Antigua finish. I'll hold it up where it can be seen really well. This is a vintage Antigua Coronado 2.
Wow.
And this is from the 1960s.
I've never seen one of those played, the Coronado.
They are so cool. And now, who was it I heard that was really into the Coronado? Oh, yeah. Actually got to meet him recently when I did a thing in Texas. It's Jimmy Vaughn. Heard he's really into the Coronado. But, you know, these are, I don't even know what's in tune right now.
How does that compare to like a 335?
They sound really different because these are those, I think that Diarmond made these pickups for him.
Oh, okay.
Sort of almost like a Dynasonic pickup, but the Diarmonds are very different. So, I love the tuning keys on this too.
So the gold foil? That's gold foil pickups.
It's got the, yeah, I guess that is. Yeah, these are, of course, I haven't changed because they're old vintage pickups, but but it's got that, real fluid vibrato. So that effect I was telling you about was
oh, right.
So it's I love these old guitars. I had to have one. I've been waiting for years to find one this kind of condition. Finally found one from a rare guitar seller, but collectible guitar seller. But I had to share that because we were talking about the Antigua.
I've never seen that color before. You pull out two of them. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, of course, the Telly's a newer one. It was made in Japan in the, good question. I think it was actually early 2000s, so it's not as old by any means, but but they're still really rare. They didn't make many of the Antiguas. Kind of a limited run. So, but the pickups were just, oh man, they were awful.
I'm going to look up that color guitar.
I changed my pickups.
Thank you, man. That was really cool. Thanks for pulling out and playing.
My pleasure.
Who's had the biggest influence on you musically and also personally?
Should have thought about that ahead of time if I might get asked that. Boy, it's so hard to say, but I mean, definitely in the really early days as a guitar player, Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton in the early days, and even now Beck's style is so fluid, and the way he uses vibrato, I think it was inevitable that it was going to make me be interested in the pedal steel because he's just so fluid, for lack of better description, in his playing. And I had a really exciting thing in Nashville. I got to meet him because I know someone in his band. So I got to meet, I wasn't even expecting to meet him and wasn't even going to try to. And they said, "Oh, no, you got to come. He loves steel guitar." And he was so funny. I mean, I just thought he was the coolest guy, Jeff Beck. And when they said, "Oh, this is the guy I told you about. He plays with Brooks and Dunn and he plays pedal steel." He goes, "Pedal steel?" He goes, "A real musician."
That's nice.
Jeff Beck saying that. I'm going, come on, give me a break. But
that's nice.
I thought he was just super nice guy. And, but definitely a hero player. And, the same with Clapton in the early days. So in the early days, it was all guitar players. And of course, B.B. King, another one. And Johnny Winter is, like I said, what caused me to want to start playing slide guitar, because Johnny Winter's playing was stunning. He was
amazing.
Just in his own league, and as a singer too.
Yeah.
But then later, of course, steel players. I mentioned that the early days it was most of the hippie steel players, Sneaky Pete and Rusty Young. And Rusty Young to this day still sounds amazing to me on everything he plays. But then it went on to more, I think, what you would call mainstream steel players. So all the usual influences, guys like Lloyd Green and Pete Drake, and even Curly Chalker for the real big chordal stuff that Curly was. But I mean, the list is so long. Of Weldon Meyer, Cal Ruckich, I could name 30 names. And they were all equally influential.
Lloyd Green just played on my buddy's record.
Oh,
do you know Jim Oblon?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Jim. I don't know.
Yeah, Jim is in Nashville.
So cool. What a feather in your cap to have Lloyd on there, huh?
Yeah, and he loved it.
The stuff that Lloyd did on the Paul McCartney stuff. He played on Sally G by Paul McCartney.
I didn't know that. That's funny, man.
How cool is that? Steel player playing on Paul McCartney stuff. That was like I said, like Pete Drake playing with Elvis.
I have to look that one up.
Yeah, played Sally G. Oh, it's fantastic stuff.
How about personally, man? Who's been the biggest influence on you?
Personally?
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't know. Obviously, my dad. My dad had a very strong work ethic, and I would like to think I hopefully got some of his work ethic. He was a hard worker, and he believed in doing it honestly, and I like that. I like honesty in work, because there's ways to cheat. There's ways to make money illegally, or there's ways, and I've had opportunities. Growing up in Detroit, you always have opportunities, like New York.
Sure.
Good things that would pay a whole lot for doing things that are very dishonest. And I never wanted to drink that Kool-Aid. And I think that was possibly because of him.
What did he do? What kind of work did he do?
He was actually a salesman in the furniture business, where he was a rep for a company, but a big company, and a self-made man who went on to do very, very well. And again, I think partly because of his strong work ethic, but he actually, in his final years, was on the board of directors for a major company, a major U.S. company. I won't say their name because the story I'm going to tell about is kind of funny. It was a different era when you didn't have background checks.
Sure.
And he had dropped out of school at 6th grade because it was Depression era.
Yeah.
And they were the Deep South. My dad was from the South. And the family was so destitute that he dropped out of school to help work part-time back when you didn't have the child labor laws.
Sure.
He would work boxing stuff up at a store in the back room and stuff to make money for the family. So he never went back to school after 6th grade.
Which is probably like incredibly common for that time.
Yeah. But I wonder if he had made it to the board of directors if they'd known he never even had a high school diploma.
Yeah, right.
Made it past 6th grade. So it was something he never told anybody.
Interesting.
He didn't tell me till I was much older. So
it's
that stuck with me.
That's a really good dad that he probably was thinking, I don't want you to think you could take it wasn't a shortcut for him. He didn't want to think, well, my dad was successful, so I can do this.
Yeah, it was hard work that got him where he was. I mean,
yeah,
ground up. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think his biggest fear is if he had told me that, I would have used that as, well, then why don't I'm going to be a musician? I should just drop out of school now.
Right.
And even as it is, my senior year, I was having to get the principal on my side to miss a lot of school because I was already doing a radio show. I didn't mention that earlier, but I was working on WJR radio with a regular music act that would appear, and I would have to miss school certain days of the week to do this radio show. And the principal thought it was really cool. So
that is
said,
cool.
well, as long as we get your work from your teachers and all that stuff, I'll allow it. So,
you still have your Michigan accent.
Yeah, a little bit, don't I?
Yeah, I hear it. No, I totally hear it. Tell me 3 more questions. Toughest decision you had to make or most difficult thing you had to do?
Oh, gosh. I think it's always been making a move. Like, it was tough to move Detroit to LA because I was leaving everything and really venturing out alone. But the same thing, to leave LA and go to Nashville and not knowing what if it just dies, what if nothing happens? It was scary to leave Los Angeles. And then, of course, I had, make big decisions to move here to Gainesville, and it's turned out to be a really wonderful experience, and I'm still happy.
Good,
and I'm still
man.
back in Nashville a bunch anyway. So, but all those decisions to make bold moves, no one in particular comes to mind, but sometimes you got to take big chances to get big breaks, and that means putting on the big boy pants.
Yeah, man, for sure.
That would I'd say I have to kind of lump those all together.
Gary, tell me the biggest change in your personality over the last 10 years and how much of that change has been intentional and how much is just a natural part of aging.
Good question. I'd like to figure that out myself. I mean, obviously some of it is aging. Realizing now that what I'm facing now is realizing that there will be life after music for me. And when I say after music, I mean professionally, because I'll keep playing, and unless someday I have arthritis or something I can't play.
Sure.
So far, thank God, none of that. But if that ever happened, I suppose I'd have to stop. But I won't quit music. But obviously, there comes an end where, for most people, where you're no longer going to be in the actual business of it. So it's starting to realize, getting that sense, even in this COVID thing, I think a lot of people are probably looking at themselves right now going, wow, what if when this starts back up, I don't get called or whatever. And I think it's a very realistic possibility. This could cause a change into the guard for a lot of industries, a lot of people. So I think everybody's a little uneasy about that, about when this starts back up, will they still call me? Or will they look elsewhere? Or will the same people even still be in power that are the people who have hired? All those things that come into play. So in this especially in this time. I've got dogs barking in the background. Sorry.
All good, man.
Especially in this day and age, I find myself thinking about that and about the life after music, which has been so much a part of my life. I'll still play for pleasure and joy, but I wonder, I'm starting to wrap my head around that there is life after doing it professionally. There is still life.
I give you a lot of credit for being even open to that, because I think music or anything else, I think a lot of people don't think about that stuff. And all of a sudden, the thought of it is paralyzing. And then a lot of them, just people you hear, they retire and they die.
Yeah. It's because so much of your self-worth is tied to
what you do. Yeah.
What you do. And so it's starting to, like I said, it's like that song, Learning to Live with Me. It's just coming to realize, personal things that matter to you too, not just the career. It's not all about the career anymore. It's my marriage is successful, and that's important to me, very important. But also, I'm a big animal lover, so my animals mean a lot to me. But also, I love Florida life. I lived here many, many years ago for a short time. Always wanted to get back to it, and now here I am, enjoying sunshine most of the year. And
yeah, that sunshine's
and it's good for me. I love sunshine. I'm not afraid of the sun. Some people are. I'm not afraid of it. I like the sun. It invigorates me. So I love the Florida life. It's really good for me, and I'm surprised how many people are either moving here or do have getaway places here.
Yeah.
Many of my friends I didn't even realize did. But so this has been good for me. But so was Tennessee for 27 years. So it's just, I would say that's certainly been a big thing, though, is to wrap my head around realizing that there will come that day when the phone won't ring, and I better still just enjoy playing for the joy of playing.
Good for you, man. Congratulations. I think that's a big step to acknowledge that. They got bigger bass here than Tennessee, though. I can tell you right now. Last question. Most important lesson life has taught you?
Oh, hard to think, but on the spot, I would come up with that you just can't do it alone. Life alone doesn't work. You depend on other people for everything, for your career, for everything. I mean, you've got to be able to understand that other people are going to play a pivotal role in your life. Without other people, I don't think you can be a success. You're going to rely on those people maybe to recommend you for jobs. They're going to be the people you work with, your colleagues, but then on a personal level, your own family, all of these things. So it's that realization that play well with others because you need them. You can't do anything just alone. There's not a one-man band that I'd want to hear.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to play well with others if you want them to play well with you. Well
put, man. I'm going to tell people where to find you. First of all, I just thank you so much for all of your time, man. You've been real generous. Really cool talking to you.
About it, and to look at your guitars on the wall while we talk.
Dude, thank you for playing. And maybe you close out with some playing too, if you're okay with that. But man, it was a joy to hear you play. That was for me, the highlight of everything, man. It's really, okay. Check out Gary Morse. He's got a record out called Resophonic Rodeo, which is available on all the streaming services. It's more of a Western swing record. He is in the middle right now of putting together a pedal steel album. Any thoughts on ideas when that might be available or ready?
Well, I am working on it, but it will take whatever it takes, I guess. So
yeah,
I can honestly say I'd be really shocked if it was ready in less than a year.
Right on.
Because
That's
of
fine.
how much I'm working on it, and because I'm a big part of it is I want to incorporate people that are special to me on it. So I'm going to be going to LA and doing some of this, probably Detroit. I might even go to Ireland and use a couple of players that I really love from Ireland that I've worked with, that I've met and worked with over here. And certainly Nashville, I'll be going and having some of my buddies play on it there, playing guitar or drums or whatever. So this album is important to me to do for my own satisfaction, and also because I want to use all these people that have become my colleagues and dear friends. I want them to be a part of it.
Man, so it's like a legacy record.
Well, I don't know, but it's something that really means a lot to me. And I was already telling one of the guys, I've got this surf tune. It's a surf guitar tune, like straight up out of the old. Like I said, I played on the Torquays albums and stuff. So it's straight up out of the old, 60s surf era. And I said, man, we used to sometimes pull out some of that stuff just for fun, and he would just nail it. And so I said, I've got this one earmarked for you. You got to do the surf beat on it.
Awesome. Anybody you could sneak preview or give a name?
Well, do you know who Johnny Highland is?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I had Johnny on the show here.
Country Bigger. Well, I already talked to him.
Great.
About working on this one song of mine that's it's quite ambitious and fast. He and I used to play together a fair amount in Nashville, and we would wear out these very, very fast instrumentals that were blistering fast. And it's one of those. It's one of those, fasten your seatbelt and dive in kind of songs, and he will nail it. So I talked to him about that. So he's already said, "Oh yeah, I'm all about it." So
awesome.
And also I talked to Pete Anderson about having him play on this one song. It would be really, it would just be terrible not to have Pete on at least one song.
Sure.
So that's another person that I know has already said, "Oh yeah, I'm on it."
Right on, man.
So there are some people that those are some people that are already pretty well known in the business.
That's amazing. Amazing what Johnny's done. The guy's blind and he plays like nobody's business, man. I mean, that's real good guy.
He's a phenomenal musician, and so it's going to be fun to work with him. We played the song together.
Oh, that's cool, man.
Yeah, it's pretty ambitiously fast, and real old style too. So I'm gonna incorporate him on that.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'll definitely look forward to hearing that.
We played it live and it's so much fun. I said, I'm going to record that. I want to put you on it. He said, man, you better. So that's our song now.
That's awesome.
We'll be on it.
Also, once life starts up again, Gary will be out with Brooks and Dunn. If you are interested in working with Gary, he is literally busy as all get out doing tracks and overdubs. Man, and you can go to his website. It's Gary. I have your website right here. It's Resophonic Radio. Resophonic Rodeo. I apologize. Go to What's that? Yeah, but it's the same as the title of his record, Resophonic Rodeo. Go there. It's a new website he's got. But if you're looking for anybody who's like the Cat's Meow and pedal steel, lap steel, dobro, 5 or 6 string banjo, baritone, go to Resophonic Rodeo there, and you can hook up with Gary and connect with him, and he'll be happy to work on your tracks remotely. And if you need insight or into production or whatever, he's been there and done that. So he's certainly a guy who could help you. You wanted to mention something about nurturing steel guitar. Oh,
yeah, it's something that, as I mentioned to you earlier, before we started, that it's important to me to see the instrument survive. And to me, the majority of the next steel players will be guitar players now that are guitar players that will want to incorporate that, maybe take it up full time or at least part time. And so when I've met guitar players who are interested in taking up steel, I've gone out of my way to work with them on the steel, like show them things, even help them get into a steel real cheap or whatever. Because if they don't take it up, then who is? I mean, the instrument will fade away into obscurity and then be gone forever. So I don't want that to happen. And so it means a lot to me to nurture this new crop of players. And so I answer their questions. I'm available. If they ever want to talk, I talk to them on the phone or in person, show them parts. They sometimes ask me, how did you play such and such on a recording? And I've sat down and showed them, verbatim how I played the parts, so they would understand. And because for some of them, it's hard just to pick out how to do that, how to play those chords. And I happen to use a ring finger as well. Most steel players will use a thumb, like a banjo player, use a thumb and 2 finger picks. And I use a ring finger as well. As a result, I can play some things that are a little difficult to play if you don't incorporate that finger.
Yeah.
So I tried to show guys how I do that, because otherwise they go, so that's how you're playing this and that. I couldn't figure it out. And I said, yeah, well, that extra finger has really come in handy. Now, some guys can't stand using the additional finger. It just throws them off. But for me, it's like I feel naked without it, without that ring finger. So I've taken time to show them techniques that they weren't aware of, and that might not even be out there to find on the internet, even because it's not that many guys who play with a thumb and 3 picks.
Dude, I'm smelling steel, lap steel instructional courses. Yeah, man. It's because if what you do is that unique, yeah.
And that's the other thing, lap steel is, being that's non-pedal. Like I showed you here that I've got a lap steel. This happens to be my own signature model, made by Perry Gurman out of Indiana, builds it for me. This is the GM Custom, my initials. But lap steel is a great transitional instrument. It was for me, and it is for guitar players, because pedal steel is a very technical, mechanical instrument.
Yeah. And
to get past the mechanical side of it and become more musical, it takes some time, because it is very mechanical. A lot of knee levers and pedals and things you're pushing. It's daunting, and it requires coordinating both hands, both knees, and both feet all at once. Lap steel is more familiar, especially if you put it like, say, in E tuning. A guitar player can wrap his head around lap steel and go, oh, well, I get that. It's tuned like to an open E, like you would get if you play an E chord on a guitar, like 2nd fret. It's that same thing. In fact, to sound it out, it's that's just a straight E tuning.
Yeah.
And by having this, there's only one major third in there, which is this G sharp. Well, that's familiar territory, because it's an E now. If you play it in the 5th fret, it's an A. So guitar players can go, oh, I get that. I can relate to that. So I tell people, start on lap, unless you're just really hell-bent on going to pedal steel. Start on lap. You can carry it around easy. You can take it with you on the road to practice if you're a touring player. Get familiar with that, because the same technique of how you hold the bar, the same technique of how you pick, is going to be all relative on the lap steel, and you'll carry it over to pedal steel. But it's the great bridge between guitar and pedal steel. And some guys won't continue past lap, but some guys will, but that's almost all of them will tell you that that's the bridge. And of course, this instrument is especially great, although I've told you before, you play Hawaiian on it if you want, but this is it's a great rocker, And so you get that, the old blues stuff, like.
Dude, that sounds so good.
Or Texas boogie. So that's a great instrument that guys can, and gals, because think like Cindy Cash Dollar and some of the females that have really made inroads on the she's well revered, as well as they should, on steel and pedal steel and everything else. But anyway, it's a great chance to experiment with slide without having to spend the money of a pedal steel, which is never cheap for a good one, ever.
That's beautiful. Is that like a lemon burst?
It is. It's sort of like I guess we'd call it a honey lemon kind of burst. I love that color.
Yeah, it's pretty, man.
That's the only one I have that has the lace pickups on. Some of the other ones have even higher output ones, but I like to have a variety, just like guitars, so I don't want them all to be bombastic, so to speak, on the output.
Sure.
But you're going to always be getting distortion. I want to be able to get some more subtle tones too. So some of my guitars have very high output pickups, not that particular one.
Well, dude, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. When I finish that, would you be cool to play a little blues or whatever you want on the way out as an exit? That would be so cool. Anything else?
It's more easy to play solo on the lap than it is, keep a little bit of rhythm than it is on pedal steel.
Yeah, man. Whatever. Is there anything else you want to talk about or promote or tell people any stuff that you got going on?
Well, just that, a thank you to all the people who've worked with me on my guitars. Like I said, Perry Gurman makes this Gurman GM Custom, my signature lap, and then Desert Rose guitars. That's what I play for pedal steel. I played Showbuds for years, and Chuck Back is an amazing steel player and builder, and he's the guy who builds all these steels, and I just absolutely, these steels became like an extension of myself. The tone is exactly what I always heard in my head, and it's like a cross for steel players. To get technical, it sounds like a cross between an old CB guitar, like Tom Brumley played with the Buckaroos, and later with Rick Nelson, and even on some of Dwight's records. Anyway, it's like a cross between a ZB and a Showbud. That's the best way I can describe it. Two of my favorite guitars, so it incorporates all of that. And the other thing is I've got my own signature amp now too. So
that's with
what I'm playing through. It's a Valve Train.
Yeah. He's down here. He's in. Wait a minute. He's in Gainesville, isn't he?
Altamont Springs.
Right. He's right.
Great amp builder, rather. And
did Eric Halbig turn you on to him?
Actually, I've known Eric for years, but it wasn't Eric that really turned me on to him. It was Eminent Speakers that built a lot of the speakers for him.
Yeah.
I was playing the NAMM show, and they introduced me to him. And it started a dialogue that went on for a few years of where we would say, we really should get together sometime and work on something, but we didn't. But once I was here in Florida, all of a sudden it was like, hey, you're a 2-hour drive. I'll come down and see what you got. And one thing led to another, and we said, let's work on an amp together. And this one called the Bennington Steel, he had a thing called the Bennington Pro. So we took that, kind of added onto it, took some things away, added some things, and then by the time we were through, it was more wattage, more headroom, some different EQs, that kind of stuff, different reverb. And,
right on, man.
We ended up with a pedal steel amp, which is also good for lap steel or whatever, guitar too. So
very cool, man.
I definitely say that I'm excited to be playing on my own model amp, and that Valve Train has been excellent. Dude,
you're like the only steel player I know. You have your own signature guitar and a signature amp. That's pretty good, man. I don't think you'd be leaving for a while.
I don't know, but I know there's some guys out there who have signature speakers and that kind of stuff, but maybe I am. I don't know. But either way, I'm delighted.
Yeah, man.
I'm delighted.
Very cool.
But yeah, I'll leave you with something kind of bluesy.
Yeah, well, let me say goodbye to everybody, and then you take it over. And thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it. And man, I'll meet you for fishing sometimes. You want to come down a little south? We can meet in the middle. That'll be great.
Love it.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please share it on your social media channels. We appreciate your support. Check out Gary Morse on the road with Brooks and Dunn. Go to Resophonic Rodeo and resophonicrodeo.com. And if you want to connect with Gary for tracks, for pedal steel, lap steel, dobro, 5/6 string banjo, or baritone, and also check out his CD, Resophonic Rodeo. Sorry, I keep messing that up. Resophonic Rodeo, which is available wherever CDs are sold. It's a great Western swing album, and look forward to his pedal steel record. Thanks very much. I want to thank all the first responders again for just being who you are and helping us out through the situation. And most important, especially nowadays, man, remember that happiness really is a choice, so choose wisely. Be nice, go play your guitar or your pedal steel or your lap steel and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, everybody. I am out. Gary, thanks very much. Take it away, brother. Let me see. Let's do your thing. Right on, man. Appreciate you, brother. Hang on. I'll wrap up with you. Thanks for everything, Gary.
Stay well.